Chapter 833. The building of the military headquarters was indeed a battleship. General Lee's office was located at the highest point of the battleship, but it was not the most important place on the battleship. The commanding office of the captain was usually located at the head of the battleship. There was also a large office at the head of the military headquarters. Different from General Lee's office, it was decorated with art pieces and all kinds of flowers and green trees. It looked like a garden, devoid of any trace of metal. A brook was flowing slowly in the deep end of the garden-like hall. There was a small pavilion at the source of the brook, in which a zither was placed. The zither was played by an elegant young master wearing a white robe. It was really unimaginable to see such a scene in the building of the military headquarters. That young master was very handsome, with a pair of eyes and brows. His slightly puckered lips were a bit thin, but they didn't look mean. Instead, he looked quite charming. His fingers were as long and slender as scallions, and they fell on the strings of the zither. It seemed that he was born to be an artist. It was quiet in the courtyard. A few subordinates in military uniforms stood by the brook and looked at the scene in the pavilion. They were so nervous that they didn't dare speak, for fear that they would disturb the young master's interest in playing the zither. However, the zither didn't make any sound in the end. The young master sighed and pulled back his fingers, saying, 3 battleships were sent there. One was cut by a broadsword, and the other was pierced by a sword. It doesn't sound like a battleship at all, it's more like a pig. Those soldiers were all generals with different numbers of golden stars on their shoulder badges. They didn't dare retort after being reprimanded by the young master. Has the remote monitoring been repaired? The young master took out a soft handkerchief and wiped his hands carefully. Then he nodded satisfactorily while comparing the handkerchief with the sunlight outside the window. A general came forward hastily and played the video on the light screen. The 7th warped passageway of the Enhai Nebula was far away from the main planet, and the battleship had been severely damaged. As a result, the restored video was not three-dimensional and a bit blurry, but it was enough to see many things clearly. For instance, the scene in which dozens of sword lights passed through the window and the middle-aged man's body. I didn't expect Chi-Song to have such a pitiful day. Looking at the human figures condensed by the sword lights, the young master said with raised eyebrows, "This guy is indeed very strong." Those who might have met him in the Mingxing community of the Stargate base have all been arrested. The investigation by the Twirling Rain Company has also started, but there are no clues for the time being. The general asked, "Should we stop the game first?" That young master ignored them and suddenly asked, "Who do you think is better looking, him or me?" This was a deadly question. The courtyard was silent. How boring. The young master looked at the light screen and said, "Just like this face, beautiful as it is a porcelain doll." The scene changed from remote surveillance to the spaceport from a few days ago. The blue-clothed youth stood at the exit of the battleship. He lifted his hat and revealed his face. He's using this face in exchange for a good reputation in the Alliance. He thinks that he'll be safer this way and that he won't be able to touch you as he pleases. This guy must have read some historical novels before. He's just a little too naive. The young master said, "But he's one of us. Just ignore him and let him be immersed in his own imagination." The generals were very surprised, thinking that this cocoon breaker had dared to resist the inspection and kill an important figure in the organization. Logically speaking, he should be dead. Why would the young master let him go? This was not in line with his temperament, and what did he mean by "one of us"? As for the investigation, there's nothing to investigate. The young master lifted both of his legs and placed them on the ancient zither. The strings of the zither gave off a buzzing sound. The generals were startled and stood up straight hastily. It's just that the priest sect is up to no good again. History always repeats itself like this. It's really boring. Let's kill all those people we've captured. The young master suddenly heard something and got up, heading toward the outside of the courtyard. There were a few dining rooms and a tea-house on each floor of the building of the military headquarters. Ran Handong was waiting in the tea-house. Many military officers sat not too far from her, trying to talk to her or just look at her. A white cloud suddenly drifted over from the other side of the passageway. It was a young master in a white robe. The military officers got up hastily and left as quickly as they could. Seeing the newcomer, the expression on Ran Handong's face changed slightly. Shin Yunmai. His talent in martial arts was the best in the world. His knowledge was the best. His beauty was the best. So was his narcissism. When he was 16, he was specially recruited by the Alliance Academy of Science to join the Frontier Research Corps group. However, he only stayed for half a year before he felt bored and went to the First Fleet. When he was 20, the First Fleet encountered an undercurrent outbreak when they were carrying out a star chain mission. They were almost wiped out, and it was thanks to him that most of their strength was preserved. At the age of 22, he led the First Fleet to complete the closed-loop star chain. He made a special contribution and was awarded the Galaxy Medal. During that war, he was seriously wounded and had to recuperate on planet Tianpu for 10 months. During that time, he was bored and tried to convert the nuclear power furnace into superparticles, and he made a breakthrough. With this success, he won the Supernova Prize without a doubt. At that time, he was only 23. He was 25 years old now, and he was the highest advisor in the military headquarters of the Federation of the Milky Way, having the authority of a general. Many people speculated that he might be General Li's younger brother who had been lost to the outside world. The reason why he wasn't an illegitimate son was because he didn't respect General Li at all. Shin Yunmai asked Ran Handong with a faint smile, "Are you waiting for someone?" "Yes," said Ran Handong. Shin Yunmai suddenly reached out his hand and pinched her face. Ran Handong was a swordsman of the young generation in the military, and she was in the star state, but she couldn't evade his hand. Shin Yunmai rubbed her face slowly, as if he were rubbing a ball of mud or a toy, a faint smile on his handsome face. "After your father dies, I'll come and rape you. You must remember to resist me then." Combined with what he had just said, the scene looked rather disgusting. All of a sudden, his fingers grew stiff, and then they slowly left Ran Handong's face one by one. He turned around and looked at the upper deck of the battleship. There was an office there. There was a window in the office. A youth in blue clothing stood by the window. The youth looked at him expressionlessly. Jing Jiu followed Colonel Chen into the long corridor. The long metal corridor seemed to be a single entity, devoid of any gaps or welding spots. However, he saw the generator of the gravitational field behind the metal walls, the high-energy laser grates, and some weapon systems he had never seen before. It would be troublesome for him to barge into this place. "Did you know I would come?" asked Jing Jiu. As soon as Jing Jiu and Ran Handong walked out of the elevator, Colonel Chen recognized Jing Jiu and invited him. It was obvious that he had come prepared. Colonel Chen said, "The general is very busy every day. He wasn't sure if he could come back to the main planet to meet you, so he gave us some instructions." There was an ordinary office at the end of the long corridor, but it was very large. The bookshelves on 3 sides of the wall were full of books. Paper books were not rare in the Federation of the Milky Way, but it was inappropriate for a human leader to use so many paper books to decorate the office. It meant that these books were meant for reading. "I'd like to take a look around," said Jingjiu. Colonel Chen said, "It's the general's intention." Jingjiu walked to the front of the bookshelf and started reading. He read the books at a fast speed, and he didn't stop reading the covers of the books at all. It didn't take long for him to finish reading the entire wall and make a judgment. These books didn't contain the combination of the cultivation methods and the technology of the Milky Way, nor did they contain the analysis of gene modification and cultivation. They were merely some common history books and a great deal of information on the internet. However, Jing Jiu was very familiar with the arrangement of these books. It was the arrangement of books on Shuriwepi. There was also a book on the desk. Jingjiu walked over to take a look and found it was The Path Toward Heaven. The pages of the book were flipped to the chapter titled, The Wind Blows Over Aoyama. It was not an ordinary paperweight that was pressed on the page, but an ornament made of 2 round blue gems. The 2 gems could be described as 2 circles, growing and multiplying endlessly. They could also be described as limitless, and they looked like the wings of a butterfly. "Don't investigate me," Jingjiu suddenly said. General Li shouldn't investigate him, but it wasn't guaranteed that this organization wouldn't investigate him. He wasn't afraid of being investigated, but the thousands of officers and soldiers on that battleship and those on the Stargate shouldn't be investigated as well. If he could meet General Li that day, nobody could tell what would happen next. Since he didn't meet General Li, Jingjiu took care of this matter. Colonel Chun didn't expect Jingjiu to make such a request. After a moment of silence he said, "This is not my job. I don't have the right to do it." "Who has the right to do it?" asked Jingjiu. It was then that he heard a noise coming from downstairs. Jingjiu came to the window and saw the scene. Ran Hondong's face was pinched by someone. Chapter 834. A youth in a blue hoodie stood by the window on the top floor, and a young master in a white robe stood by the railing on the lower floor. The 2 of them met each other's gazes in the spacious building of the military headquarters at a distance of several hundred meters. No wind whipped up, no sword sound, and no sparks could be seen, but the content of their gazes was immeasurable. If it were another story or a classic scene, the 2 of them would pull back their gazes in the next moment and turn around to leave. They wouldn't meet again until they had gone through many storms and many years. They would recall the first time their gazes met many years later, and then a thrilling fight would ensue, pushing the plot to a climax. It was too troublesome and time-consuming for Jingjiu. He disappeared from the window and reappeared in front of Shen Yunmai. A gust of wind blew up this time. The hood of the blue hoodie was lifted up, exposing his face. Shen Yunmai's finger had just left Ran Hondong's cheek, the tip of his finger still feeling a bit warm. Looking at Jingjiu's face, Shen Yunmai was a bit absent-minded. Then, he let out a wry smile and said, "Isn't it a bit early for us to meet?" Jingjiu didn't pay attention to the implied meaning in his statement. "Do you have the right of access?" he asked. He had requested the release of the soldiers on the battleship in General Li's office earlier, but Major Chun said that he didn't have the right to do so. Did Shen Yunmai have the right of access? Shen Yunmai said to Jingjiu with a faint smile, "I do." This most outstanding young master in the Federation of the Milky Way was indeed very good-looking. His casual smile was charming enough to enchant the masses. "Are you a descendant of the Ascendants?" asked Jingjiu after shooting him a few glances. What he meant was that this person was a descendant of the Ascendants from Chaotian and a human in the Federation of the Milky Way. Shen Yunmai said, "This is not the fairy world, nor is it the upper world. You have to change your habits. You are the cocoon breakers." Jingjiu didn't care about this, and he had no intention of acknowledging him as a fellow from the same hometown. "The right of access?" he pressed. Shen Yunmai ascertained the purpose of his visit. "You're indeed different from them," he said while staring into Jingjiu's eyes. Ran Handong had just come back to her senses. She took a glance at Jingjiu and backed away silently. Shen Yunmai continued, "It's impossible to let them go. Those who know your secret and our secret must die. Those on the battleship are already dead." Jingjiu said, "No, if they die, you will die too." This was not a threat or intimidation, but an objective, calm, and powerful statement. "Do you know who I am?" Shen Yunmai raised his eyebrows and said in a different tone, "Doesn't this sound like what the villains usually say? These words are indeed powerless and will only invite ridicule." "But I am very powerful," Jingjiu said. "I think I know who you are." Shen Yunmai raised his hand to stroke his waterfall-like black hair and said with a bored tone, Since you know who I am, how dare you touch me? Even if you are different from those cocoon breakers and have some inexplicable courage, if you suddenly want to touch me, how can you touch me?" Without waiting for Jingjiu to speak, he sighed and continued, "Don't you think this kind of life is boring? One would feel lonely when he was invincible, and loneliness would be like the snow." Though what he said sounded pretentious, it was true that he would feel bored or lonely if he had stood on the peak top for many years. "It's all right," replied Jingjiu after thinking of his 2 lives. He didn't feel bored or lonely, it was just that he felt annoyed sometimes. He welcomed anything that could save him some trouble. Shin Yunmai displayed an amused expression as he said, "The cocoon breakers are all proud. I've seen them before, but they are not as proud as you." He thought of how to describe Jingjiu's temperament. "Natural?" he asked uncertainly. "They have been defeated," said Jingjiu. "But I haven't," Shin Yunmai said sentimentally. "I've figured it out. The temperament you exude is not the natural arrogance. It's something that can make people feel unhappy." "Have you finished talking?" asked Jingjiu. "I hope what you said is true, otherwise I'll have a feeling of emptiness again. In order to make you take it more seriously, let's do it this way," Shin Yunmai went on while staring at Jingjiu. "If you lose, Zhong Lizi, Jiang Yuxia and the little girl of the Hua clan will all die." A moment ago, he had pinched Ran Hondong's face and said that he would rape her if her father died. Of course, he didn't want to rape her, just like how he didn't want to kill the successor of the female priest of the Stargate. These were merely the bargaining chips he tossed on the table. Life was a boring game for him. Jingjiu was not irritated by this remark. His countenance was still as calm as ever, but he had raised his right hand and pointed it forward. This movement seemed simple and casual, but it was actually dreadful. It was because it was too fast. Many people in the building of the military headquarters were paying attention to the commotion, and many surveillance devices were aimed in this direction. But nobody could see Jingjiu's movement clearly, and none of the surveillance devices could capture his movement. Jingjiu's long and slender finger was like the sharpest sword, cutting through hundreds of thousands of air molecules and creating countless tiny turbulence due to the friction. The turbulence had no time to emit a glow, which looked like the threads of glass being melted by the high temperature. Shin Yunmai was the only one who could see Jingjiu's movement and the finger clearly, and he was the only one who could do something about it. Jingjiu lifted his right hand as his sleeve tousled slightly, but the first wrinkle had just appeared on the edge of the sleeve before it actually fluttered. His finger landed on Jingjiu's shoulder. It was still a bit too slow. Jingjiu's finger landed on the center of Jingjiu's eyebrows. Time seemed to have stopped at this moment. To put it more precisely, time began to move forward at a normal speed from this moment on. The scene was witnessed by everybody, and all the surveillance devices were absolutely still. They looked like the shooters who aimed their guns at their opponents at a very short distance in the retro movie. Those 2 fingers were like 2 extremely powerful guns. The 2 of them seemed to have pulled the triggers at the same time. A loud bang resounded. His white robe fluttered like a flag in a mess. Shin Yunmai whizzed through the air like a stone and flew backward. The sounds of violent collisions kept ringing out. Several solid walls were broken one after another, raising a cloud of smoke and dust. The people who witnessed the scene were so shocked that they even forgot to exclaim. Their faces were full of incredulity. A straight passageway appeared in the building of the military headquarters. The smoke and dust gradually settled, revealing a figure. Shin Yunmai's white robe was slightly torn, and his eyes were a bit perplexed. But he soon calmed down. Looking at the blue figure in the distance, he tilted his head slightly and suddenly smiled. It seemed that he found the scene quite interesting. As he did so, a drop of blood seeped out from the center of his eyebrows. The drop of blood emitted a faint golden glow when it was illuminated by the sunlight. Jingjiu took a look at his left shoulder and found a tiny cut on his blue robe. He lifted his head and looked into the distance, thinking it was quite interesting. Having thought of this, he came up to Shun Yunmai and pointed his finger at the center of his eyebrows again. Chapter 835. The finger Jingjiu extended was not the sword style of the Aoyama sect, nor was it any magic method in Chaotian. It was a simple swing of the sword. It was because he was fully aware that the fight would be more troublesome if he used the sword style of the Aoyama sect. He was the kind of person who disliked trouble the most, and preferred to accomplish something simply. Simplicity didn't mean that the sword was not powerful enough. It meant that the sword was focused and pure. It was similar to the sword wielded by the child of the No Mercy sect who killed Emperor Shao amid the falling leaves. It turned out that Jingjiu's choice was as correct and perfect as the choice he had made in every fight over the past 1,000 years. Shin Yunmai had no other way to deal with his simple sword, so he had no choice but to fight it head-on. Fighting head-on was a contest of toughness. No matter whether it was in Chaotian or the Federation of the Milky Way, nothing was harder than the all-in-one sword. As expected, Shin Yunmai was defeated in this fight. What Jingjiu didn't expect was that his simple and focused sword couldn't kill his opponent. The sword light had pierced through Shin Yunmai's body, but it couldn't penetrate his body. Shin Yunmai was only slightly wounded. "Let's try another sword." The sword light flashed faintly. His finger dropped down. An extremely clear sword chime rang out. This time his finger didn't land on the center of Shin Yunmai's eyebrows. It was unclear when Shin Yunmai raised his right hand to shield his eyes. The sword sound was the sound when Jingjiu's finger met his palm. Jingjiu's finger sensed the countless sword wills encircling it and sensed a familiar energy, but it also encountered a great deal of resistance. The sword wills coming out from Shin Yunmai's finger were like countless threads woven into the softest and most tenacious cloth in the world, blocking his most focused sword strike like a swamp. It was the inherited heaven sword formation on Tianguang Peak. Jingjiu had anticipated this. His expression didn't change, and his finger kept thrusting forward. The crisp sword sound broke out like a rainstorm, echoing in the whole building of the military headquarters. The desks were smashed to pieces instantly, and many deep marks appeared on the hard alloy walls. Countless sword lights passed through the gaps between Shin Yunmai's fingers and fell into his eyes. His face was a little pale, and his eyes were still indifferent, but his expression had become much more cautious. His white sleeves fluttered again, and snow fell out of nowhere on the ruins. Amidst several deep, buzzing sounds, an unimaginable chill appeared, piercing through the snowflakes and heading towards Jingjiu. This was the snow stream sword art, but it was more powerful and had a lower temperature than the snow stream sword art of Shangda Peak. What he used was not a sword, but a cryogenic ray. The source of the snowflakes was a cryogenic ray gun on the west side of the military building. Jingjiu did not turn around, nor did he dodge. Instead, he waved his left hand. Dozens of sword lights blossomed like plum blossoms, blocking the low-temperature ray gun before twisting upwards and destroying it. The sword light drifted down and left a plum blossom mark on Shin Yunmai's left hand. The 7-apricot sword art of Shilai Peak was the perfect counter to the snow stream sword art of Shangda Peak. The expression on Shin Yunmai's face did not change. He clenched his left hand. Thunder rumbled and dispersed the sword will of 7-apricot. Dozens of self-propelled laser cannons arrived in the sky. Accompanied by the rumbling thunder, they launched another attack. Thunders in all directions was the main sword of Bihu Peak. Countless sword lights lit up in the depths of the military building. No one knew what this battle meant. This should be the most exciting fight of swordsmanship since the founding of Aoyama sect tens of thousands of years ago. Countless ancient or unorthodox swordsmanship of various peaks were competing against each other in the smoke and dust. They were mutually reinforcing and restraining each other. His white robe fluttered in the smoke and dust. Shin Yunmai reached out his hand and fired a laser cannon. As far as the eye could see, dozens of self-propelled mechas were advancing one after another. Jingjiu waved his left hand and the snow stream came out. With a tremble of his fingertips, plum blossoms blossomed. Each had his own way of doing things, and each had his own style. Innumerable sword lights gradually formed a sword formation. The eye of the formation was actually the generator of the gravitational field inside the battleship. It had to be said that Shen Yunmai's swordsmanship was extraordinarily profound, and his insight was also excellent. He was able to identify Jingjiu's weakness in such a short time. If he could use the inherited heaven sword formation strengthened by the gravitational field to trap Jingjiu, what would happen next? It was then that Shen Yunmai's left hand suddenly couldn't move. It was unclear when Jingjiu's left hand had dropped down. Countless thin sword wills were between his fingers, locking Shen Yunmai's hand. What sword style is this? Shen Yunmai displayed a baffled expression in his eyes. He was quite familiar with the inherited heaven sword of Tianguang Peak, Shanghai Peak and Shirui Peak. Yet, he had never seen such a sword style. It's the endless sword style of Qingrong Peak, said Jingjiu. Shen Yunmai recalled the book titled, The Path Toward Heaven, and exclaimed angrily, "Is this the advantage of being a late learner?" Qingrong Peak appeared very late. It happened after the civil strife in Aoyama and the massacre of Machin Peak. The Grandmasters hadn't left Chaotian at the time. Shen Yunmai and Jingjiu had learned all the sword styles of the peaks in Aoyama, but he had no idea what the endless sword style was. Jingjiu said while looking at him, "Don't use those dirty tricks. You should be more powerful than you are now." "But it's boring," said Shen Yunmai. Jingjiu said, "It's more boring if you're dead." "Why don't you go to hell then?" demanded Shen Yunmai. No sooner had he said this than he flipped his right hand and grabbed Jingjiu's wrist with countless sword light. This sword style should be derived from the old sword style of Machin Peak. He continued while staring into Jingjiu's eyes, "If so, it's very easy to learn." Countless sword lights came out from the hands of the two of them, looking like the light rays of a permanent star. The alarm rang out in the building of the military headquarters. Countless weapon platforms started scanning, but they couldn't find the target. The smoke and dust rose up, gradually obscuring the view, but the sword lights coming out from the inside were still visible. The sword lights cut everything in the surroundings into pieces like a lotus flower. The sword lights that looked like the nebula ignored the sturdy alloy walls and all the shielding doors and dropped down from the top of the building of the military headquarters, eliciting many surprised screams. The laser beams summoned by Shen Yunmai shot out once in a while to increase the power of the sword light. "The laboratory is over there. Inform them immediately. It's too late." Along with countless surprised screams, dozens of swordsmen of the military in their battle armors rushed over there. The experimental subjects in the laboratory of the military headquarters were the monsters of the sea of dark matter. If they were allowed to escape, they would cause a great disturbance on the main planet. Crack! The front door of the laboratory was destroyed, and a monster in the shape of a black cloud and fog, exuding a destructive and cold intent, rushed out from inside. Yet it was sliced into the tiniest particles by the sword light before it could cause any disturbance, dispersing like the smoke and dust. Was this the strength of the rumored inherited night state? Seeing the scene, everybody was stunned speechless. The young Master Shen was indeed the most talented swordsman in the Federation of the Milky Way. Boom! The structure of the battleship on the west side of the building of the military headquarters couldn't withstand the fight between the swordsmen any longer and collapsed. The smoke and dust rose up into the sky, as if they were about to enter the bright sky. A few battleships in the space had their main laser cannons activated, ready to fire at any moment. Hundreds of battleships flew into the sky and aimed their most powerful weapons at the patch of smoke and dust. As the smoke and dust settled, two figures appeared. Shen Yunmai sat in the ruins, raising his hands high. He didn't surrender. It was because his hands were grabbed by Jingjiu and he couldn't let go of them. The flesh and blood on his arms had collapsed, exposing the complicated metal lines. It seemed that his arms had been modified thoroughly. The blood flowed forward from the metal lines and dripped into the dust, making pitter-patter sounds. Chapter 836. The sound of police sirens could be vaguely heard in the distant streets of the capital, but none of the flying devices of the police dared come close. The remaining smoke came out from the gap in the building of the military headquarters. Once in a while, the broken pieces of the alloy door would fall down from the high place, making thudding sounds as the broken stones splashed up. Hundreds of armored mechas hovered in the sky, looking like a dense flock of birds. The deep buzzing of the engines was similar to the sound of the birds flapping their wings. The gun barrels and the launchers were all aimed at Jingjiu in the thin smoke. No matter how the mechas moved, they didn't deviate from the target. They could fire an unimaginable firepower at any time. A few battleships outside the atmosphere had already locked onto Jingjiu. The biggest threat came from the battleship on the ground, which was the building of the military headquarters. The building of the military headquarters was severely damaged, and the weapon system inside hadn't been put to good use yet. The device to generate the gravitational field was ready to isolate the area at any time. By then, the main laser gun of the battleship, the armored mechas, and the automatic platform would be unnecessary. All they needed was the nuclear bomb inside the gravitational field to kill Jingjiu at a close distance. However, under the current circumstances, Shen Yunmai had no choice but to die together with Jingjiu. Nobody could afford such a price. All they could do was hope that Jingjiu would surrender voluntarily. Jingjiu didn't pay any attention to the mechas in the sky and the heavy weapons that could threaten him. He looked at the young man in front of him in silence. A few battleships and countless soldiers of the Federation of the Milky Way were waiting for his answer. Jingjiu was waiting for the answer. After coughing twice, Shen Yunmai said, "Everybody will be released. I won't cause you any trouble in the next 60 days. I won't cause you any trouble." This was a sincere condition, and he didn't leave any loopholes in his words. Most importantly, he didn't show any hesitation, as if he had this idea from the very beginning. The badly damaged building of the military headquarters had a different opinion. Jingjiu let go of Shen Yunmai's hands and turned around, heading toward the outside of the building. The heavily armored soldiers stepped aside reflexively to let him pass. Ran Handong appeared out of nowhere and handed a white wet towel to Jingjiu. Jingjiu took the wet towel and wiped the blood off his hands. Although he didn't need it, he was still very satisfied with her performance. Suddenly encountering such a major incident, this young female officer, other than turning a little pale, was still calm and did not forget her job. He thought that it was not important whether Gu Qing could ascend or not. There was no sound in the military building. It was as quiet as a tomb. Countless gazes, and at least hundreds of lasers locked onto the two men as they disappeared into the distant corner of the street. Only then did they retract their gazes and look at the ruins. Shen Yunmai was still sitting on the ground with his hands raised like a soldier surrendering. But no one dared to show the slightest bit of disrespect, nor did they show any contemptuous or mocking expressions. As far as the soldiers of the Federation of the Milky Way were concerned, he was like a real god. Unexpectedly, he had fallen into the dust that day. No one could accept this fact. At this moment, everyone's mood was filled with frustration and unexplainable anger. Everybody knew Ran Handong, but who was that youth in the blue hoodie? Some of them recalled the live broadcast of the harbor a few days ago. Shen Yunmai stood up. For some reason, he was still in the same posture with his hands raised. What did he intend to do? Some of them wondered if his young master intended to stimulate the morale of the soldiers by humiliating himself. Everybody looked at him, waiting for his order to attack. Time passed by. That person must have walked far away by now. Shen Yunmai still didn't make a sound. The atmosphere in the building of the military headquarters grew exceedingly depressing. Shen Yunmai suddenly laughed out. His laughter echoed in the spacious building of the military headquarters. Everybody could tell that it was not a sneer or a resentful laughter, but a genuine and joyful laughter. Nobody was stupid enough to ask his young master why he laughed. A few secretarial officers approached him as quickly as they could, in an attempt to check on his injuries. Shin Yunmai asked, "Do you know why I've been raising my hands?" The officers did not know the answer, and they didn't dare speculate. "Idiots, it's because it hurts." Looking at his bloody arms, Shin Yunmai said after a moment of silence, "But it feels really good." Countless dark clouds gathered in the sky, blocking the dazzling light of the permanent star and the battleships. The huge battleship, the building of the military headquarters, had gradually disappeared behind the two of them. There was no pedestrian on the street. It was so quiet that it looked more like an abandoned civilization than the capital of the main planet. The quiet street, the tightly closed windows of the buildings, and the gravitational waves could be sensed everywhere. All these indicated that danger was waiting for them ahead. Jingzhou halted his steps. He took out a pair of glasses from somewhere and put them on carefully. Seeing this, Ran Handong felt it odd, wondering if he still wanted to conceal his face at the moment. Jingzhou lifted his head to look at a spot in the sky and said, "Would it be more effective if we attacked another battleship?" The dark clouds were thick in the sky. It was unclear why he was so certain that there would be a battleship there. More importantly, what did he mean by that? Ran Handong understood what he meant. Her face grew paler as she said in a low voice, "The government is exerting pressure on us. Please be patient." She truly understood what Jingzhou meant. Jingzhou could indeed see the battleship behind the clouds, and he could even see the markings of the engines on the battleship. It had nothing to do with the sword eyes, but the silver-rimmed glasses on the bridge of his nose. After the immortal Qi Song was killed by him, he had the glasses. After some study, he was certain that the glasses were the same as his ring. They were all data terminals. This data terminal could enter the military network through a secret passage without being detected by that entity. A great deal of data entered the glasses through the network. After being calculated and compared, the data would be displayed in a real-time simulation. The battleships, the laser cannon platforms, the gravitational field generators, the electromagnetic guns, the mechas, and many other military facilities appeared before his eyes. Soon, he received more data and information. The mechas of many powerful departments had blocked off the periphery of the street, and a few battleships were on their way back to the main planet in the distant space. It must be the so-called pressure from the government, or in other words, the sincerity of the government. Jingzhou didn't do anything else. He kept walking forward. Ran Handong hastened to catch up with him. She started introducing Shin Yunmai to Jingzhou to prevent him from having those unimaginable thoughts. In her opinion, Jingzhou should be interested in that person. As expected, when she told him about Shin Yunmai's glorious past in the fleet and the Science Academy, Jingzhou listened to her attentively. Ran Handong said, "In the beginning, many people guessed that he was the illegitimate son of General Li, but this rumor was soon proven to be false. It's because many people have seen that he didn't treat General Li politely, nor did he show any other emotion. And a high-level official of the government who insisted on this speculation was killed by him in public at a wine party. The law would only exert its power in a stable civilization. The Human Federation of the Milky Way had a high level of civilization, but it couldn't be considered stable due to the threat of the Sea of Dark Matter. The tranquility in the last few years was more like the preparation period before a great turmoil. Shin Yunmai has been modifying his body. It's common among the swordsmen in the military. But it's strange that he has a strong aversion to the advanced technology, or in other words, he holds it in contempt." Ran Handong continued, "The people in the upper class know that he likes playing the zither, and he likes the kind of zither you have written, and he likes the legendary world of Xianxia." "He has his reasons," said Jingzhou. Ran Handong didn't understand what he meant. Jing Jiu admired the guy named Shen Yunmai. In the earlier fight, Shen Yunmai had demonstrated an outstanding talent in cultivation and fighting prowess, and he had a high attainment in the sword work. His Aoyama sword style was not inferior to that of Guangyu and Jinren, to say nothing of the disciples of the young generation like Shuoruzhui and Yuan Chu. In fact, it was even better. The seemingly messy attacks actually hid a clear intention, and his strategy was as good as that of Tong Yen. His sword heart was illuminated, and his lethal intent was as firm as a rock, not weaker than Zhao Lei's. More importantly, this descendant of the ascendants from Chao Tian and the humans in the Federation of the Milky Way had the advantages of the two worlds, and he combined the cultivation and the modern technology perfectly. He employed the low-temperature rays to wield the snow-flowing sword style and the laser guns to wield the thunder in all directions. It was not as simple as it sounded. It was impossible to achieve it unless one had a deep understanding of the two civilizations. According to Ran Handong, he was merely 26 years old. He was indeed a member of Aoyama. Jingjiu thought. Ran Handong continued, this person acts as he pleases. He looks a bit crazy and perverted, but in fact, he thinks everything is boring. Earlier in the building of the military headquarters, Shen Yunmai pinched her face and threatened to rape her. She felt terrified at the moment. Yet, she was fully aware that the reason he said and did so was not because of sexual desire, whether it was for the sake of sex, violence, or power. Shen Yunmai merely thought it was meaningless to live. Nobody can figure out why a person like him thinks life is meaningless, said Ran Handong. Shen Yunmai was the most perfect human being in the universe regardless of the perspective, with a bright future ahead of him and a great cause ahead of him. Why would such a person sink into the swamp of nihilism? He has no goal, was the answer given by Jingjiu. Ran Handong said, it's true that he reached the peak state at a young age, but isn't there still the sea of dark matter? It's because the sea of dark matter is also in this universe, said Jingjiu. Ran Handong widened her eyes, wondering what he meant by that. He's not confident enough, said Jingjiu, feeling a bit regretful. Ran Handong was even more baffled, wondering if any man would become a philosopher after putting on a pair of glasses. Chapter 837. Regardless of whether they were philosophers or scientists, they had to go back to their own homes and mothers after the work was done. Not everyone had a mother, but they always had a home, even if it was just a temporary residence, like the manor house of the priest clan. The whistling floating train brought the air in the tunnel with it, bringing in the fresh air filled with the smell of wild grass, which was a gust of wind. As Jingjiu and Ran Handong returned to the small building, the main preacher and the others came over like a gust of wind. They intended to ask something, but Ran Handong stopped them on the ground floor. The Special District of Capital is on lockdown. The fleet has issued a Level 3 warning, and the praying hall has sent many people here. Zhong Lizi had vaguely guessed something. What has happened? She asked Jingjiu. I'm bored. Let's take a walk. Lying on the bamboo chair, Jingjiu rested with his eyes closed. When they were bored, they liked to go out for a walk by the river or in the park. However, the capital was on lockdown as soon as he took Ran Handong out for a walk, and the whole planet was alarmed. Where had he gone? Zhong Lizi had many questions, but she could tell that he was truly exhausted. She poured a cup of tea from the iron kettle and placed it on the tea table by the chair, heading for the outside of the room. Before she walked out of the room, she suddenly remarked, "You look pretty with the glasses on." The door of the room was closed slowly, soundless. Jingjiu opened his eyes and picked up the teacup to have a sip. He turned on the TV screen without taking off the glasses. As he came to the outside of the room, Jiang Yuxia and Hua Shi came up to him, asking, "What has happened?" Zhong Lizi shook her head slightly and looked at Ran Handong, who was in a daze while leaning against the wall. Ran Handong turned to the guest room and sat on the chair. It wasn't until now that she had calmed down. Calmness usually meant that she had returned to reality. She had tried her best not to think about the fears flooding into her mind. Thinking of the scenes in the building of the military headquarters, her body began to tremble uncontrollably. Seeing the scene, Zhong Lizi and the others were startled. "Big sister, are you all right?" asked Hua Shi worriedly. Ran Handong waved her hand and took out a cigarette with her trembling fingers. She lit it up and inhaled twice. The smoke entered her body, bringing with it a slight spicy pain. It slightly eased her emotions, but it was still far from enough. It would be better if she could have a cup of strong alcohol, she thought. The fear came from Shin Yunmai's madness and Jingjiu's performance. At that moment, she really thought that Jingjiu would kill him, just like how he destroyed the warship in the Inhai Nebula. If Shin Yunmai died, how many people would be buried with him? It could be the entire Federation of the Milky Way. The words "emergency news" appeared on the TV screens of countless households. Soon, the entire planet knew what had happened in the capital district today. The Alliance military headquarters was attacked by the surrendering faction. Those crazy Dark Force fanatics used extremely powerful weapons. The military eliminated all the terrorists in a very short period of time, but the military headquarters building still suffered a lot of damage. However, according to the news, not a single brave soldier or staff member died in this terrorist attack. Only a dozen or so people were injured by the rubble of the explosion. Jingjiu knew that some humans were the admirers of the Sea of Dark Matter and thought that the Federation of the Milky Way should give up resisting and accept the invasion of the darkness, becoming a part of eternity. Jingjiu could understand why those people had such an idea, but he couldn't accept it. As such, he appreciated the speed of the authorities' response and action. Jingjiu pulled back his gaze and picked up the teacup to have a sip. Then he closed his eyes again to rest. Though he didn't consume too much of his fairy energy in this fight, he still exerted some of his mental energy. He truly appreciated Shen Yunmai, which was similar to seeing a nearly perfect pearl or a raw stone of excellent quality. Yet, this didn't affect his attitude toward this person. It was too annoying to have the pearl dangling from his earlobe, and the raw stone had sharp edges that would hurt his feet on the way. What should he do then? He would of course tear it off or throw it away. If the person didn't listen to him, he would crush it into powder. This was the principle of killing with one swing of the sword. Why didn't he kill Shin Yunmai then? It was probably because many people would die because of this, like those on the Scorching Sun battleship and those in the Mingxing community. It was probably because Shin Yunmai was not easy to kill. His bones had been tempered by the fairy energy and were mixed with a special alloy, so he was not weaker than Jingjiu. To break the defense completely, Jingjiu would need at least 3,000 swings of the sword. It would be enough time for the military of the Federation of the Milky Way to construct a shield with a large gravitational field, and then the fireworks would explode inside. Jingjiu wouldn't accept the idea of perishing together with his enemy, even if there was only a slight risk. It was probably because there was someone else behind Shin Yunmai. That person was the real trouble. Whether it was in terms of seniority, relationship, or ability, he was a problem. He had hidden in the underground neighborhood of the Stargate and intended to come to the main planet after finding the Snow Girl. It was because he was aware that there were some weapons and people in this world who could pose a threat to him. He didn't want to deal with those people too soon, even though they didn't intend to kill him, as General Li had said in the phone call. Those were merely possibilities. Jingjiu was the only one who knew the real reason. It was then that a quarrel broke out downstairs, indicating that some new trouble had arrived. A few main preachers of the praying hall and General Ran arrived. The General Ran referred to was not the vice commander of the military, Ran Donglu, but his son, the big brother of Ran Handong. The expression on General Ran's face was grave, and the main preachers looked terrible. "Does he know what he is doing?" they asked the main preacher Taiyong. The main preacher Tai Yang had been serving Jingjiu all this time and regarded him as a god, so he wouldn't allow anyone to disrespect him. "Do you guys know what you are doing?" he demanded icily. General Rand demanded while staring into his eyes. He should be here waiting to be summoned by that person. Why did he suddenly go to the special district of capital? He felt bored waiting, so he asked me to go there with him to have a look. Ran Handong walked to the railing on the second floor and looked down at the crowd. A faint smoke came out from her mouth along with her nonchalant voice. Seeing her in such a state and thinking of the news he had just received, General Ran couldn't control his emotion any longer. "Nobody can suppress such a significant event," he said icily. "The whole of the Federation will know the truth soon. Does he intend to instigate a war between the military and the praying hall and destroy the whole of the Federation? I hope he can come up with a reasonable explanation." Ran Handong said, "He's tired and needs to take a rest." General Ran grew even more furious, yelling, "What do you want to do this time?" Ran Handong extinguished the smoke in her hand on the wall and said nonchalantly, "My father asked me to assist him in all his affairs. I'm his secretary now." General Rand suppressed his emotion and whispered in her ear, "He is forcing us to express our opinion." It was true that Jingjiu was exerting pressure on the Allied government and the priests behind the government, no matter whether it was the matter of the building of the military headquarters or the preparation of a battleship. At such a critical moment, the government and that person had to make a decision as soon as possible, whether they would be on Jingjiu's side or not. Ran Handong was aware of what was on Jingjiu's mind, which was why she asked him to be patient with the government in the special district of capital. "What's the problem?" she asked expressionlessly. General Ran thought it was absurd, saying, "He is merely one person no matter how strong he is. As long as those battleships didn't return to the inner part of the galaxy, all the regions and the populace were under the control of the government, at least nominally. Though there were many preconditions and attributions, the government was the ruler of this world in fact, save for the military headquarters. The Praying Hall, as the only legitimate inheritor and propagator of the distant ancient civilization, had countless believers and the power of faith from billions of stars. The government and the Praying Hall were one side of the human civilization. It was extremely arrogant of a human to force the whole civilization to express their opinion. Ran Handong's response to this was simple and straightforward: "Xin Yunmai has almost died today." Upon hearing this, General Ran and the main preachers of the Praying Hall were all stunned, frozen on the spot. What had happened in the building of the military headquarters that day couldn't be concealed from the whole world, but the details of what had happened in the building were kept confidential. Even the Ran family didn't know about it. Xin Yunmai was the advisor of the highest level in the military headquarters, the most outstanding figure in the Federation of the Milky Way, and one of the strongest swordsmen in this world, but he had almost been killed by that person. "As you know, I was on the scene," Ran Handong said while holding the deformed tobacco in her hand while staring into her brother's eyes. "So I'm certain that this is his intention. It's time for you, or that person, to express his intention." General Rand still couldn't accept the fact, murmuring, "Even if what you said is true, he is still too reckless. It's meaningless to talk about it. What he needs now is an answer. When will that person be willing to meet him?" "I'll give you." Ran Handong paused for a moment before continuing, 3 days. Otherwise, I think he will meet that person himself." Upon hearing this, the main preachers of the Praying Hall left the small building hastily with a changed expression on their faces. Seeing them disappear on the other side of the manor, Ran Handong turned around and returned to the room. "I think we'll hear from him soon," she said to Jingjiu. Looking at the tasteless tea in the teacup, Jingjiu said, "What you said is correct. This is my intention, but 3 days is too long." Recalling that he said on the street in the special district of capital that he would shoot down another battleship, Ran Handong said with a pale face, "Please calm down and be more patient. I'm not fishing. Why should I be patient? Snapped Jingjiu. After a moment of silence, Ran Handong said, I'll boil some new tea for you. Chapter 838. Fishing required patience, and so did brewing tea. It was not necessary to drink tea, but one had to wait for the tea to be brewed before drinking it. The silvery coals in the small stove turned red slowly, and the water in the iron kettle would boil for a while. Jingjiu walked to the deck and looked at the night sky, reflecting on something. The stars could be seen during the day here, and there were even more stars at night, more than in Chaotian and the Stargate. The stars seemed to fill up the entire sky. It was impolite to those with trypophobia. If it weren't for the protective shield, the main planet would be unsuitable for humans to sleep at night. Even though the protective shield had filtered most of the starlight, the manor house and the distant mountains could still be seen clearly. Zhong Lizi, Jiang Yuxia and Hua Shi were sitting on the grass. Hua Shi was playing with the tangible starlight with her fingers, feeling quite happy. Zhong Lizi said softly, I knew he must be an outstanding person, but I didn't expect him to be so outstanding. He was regarded as a new god by the female priest of the Stargate, but he had come back unscathed. This was beyond her imagination. Looking at the figure on the deck, Jiang Yuxia sighed. I didn't expect it either. Hua Shi didn't know why her two big sisters looked at them with widened eyes, looking at them with a heavy heart on such a beautiful night and under the starlight. I didn't expect that I wouldn't even be qualified to say that I liked a boy in front of him after I fell in love with him, Jiang Yuxia continued. Zhong Lizi said comfortingly while rubbing her head, It's useless even if I said that. He would definitely say something boring like hormone secretion, reproduction, and inferior. How did you know that? Asked Hua Shi curiously. He had learned everything he needed to know. It was about the attack on the building of the military headquarters. Of course, only the important figures in the upper echelons of the Federation of the Milky Way and the military officers in the building knew the truth. The populace who had seen the news felt uneasy, and then they were enraged and courageous. A few demonstrations took place on planet Tianpu, which had always been aloof from worldly affairs, to demand the government to crack down harder on the capitulators. The fire-passing pagoda on various planets had received countless well-wishers, and the praying hall had received more offerings. It was unclear if this was a pleasant surprise or not. The military had to do something regardless of whether it was to alleviate the anger of the populace or to give a superficial explanation. The military's Internal Affairs Division worked together with the powerful police department to crack down on the capitulators in various sectors. The Starpeak fleet entered the deep part of the Jelly Star region bravely and began to wipe out the remaining monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter on the surface of the cold planet. Young Master Shen, the highest-ranking advisor of the army, was the commander of this fleet. Naturally, he had also left the main planet. The news would not be broadcasted, and the ordinary people would not be able to see the real danger of the remaining monsters and the terrorist attacks of the capitulators in some places. What did the movement of the Star Edge fleet have to do with the return of the fleet stationed at the second forward operating base? Why did the important departments of the government, the manors of the priest masters and the praying halls in various places suddenly turn on the devices of the gravitational fields at the same time and turn them on to the maximum without regard for the energy consumption? The Alliance Management Committee suddenly held an emergency meeting in the early hours of the morning. Could it be that they were only discussing the fleet budget? More importantly, why did Cluster, the most advanced command warship of the Alliance, leave the Star Chain Fleet and come to the main planet through the Enhai Nebula alone? 3 days after the command warship named Cluster had passed through the Enhai Nebula, the invitation from the Praying Hall had finally passed through the gravitational field of the manor and landed on the tea table. There was a small stove not far from the tea table, on which the water in the iron kettle gurgled. It sounded like a mocking voice, at least in the ears of the main preachers of the Praying Hall. Jingjiu didn't look at the invitation, nor did he make things difficult for these main preachers. He got up and said, "Let's go." There was a female priest in every sector of the Federation of the Milky Way, responsible for inheriting the tinder of the civilization and gathering the belief of the populace. These female priests were named after the planets they resided on, like the female priest of the Stargate whom Jingjiu was most familiar with. The female priest on the main planet was the only one who was special. It was because she was special to begin with. She was the first female priest during the rebirth of the human civilization, and it was unclear where she got the inheritance of the distant ancient civilization. With the tinder of the distant ancient civilization, the humans who reappeared on the main planet developed their intelligence again and entered the interstellar era at a great speed. She was the only connection between this world and the civilization that had disappeared more than 100,000 years ago, and she was the true enlightened person. All the female priests were her students and had to be appointed by her. As such, she came here from the Stargate base. The whole human world appreciated her existence and admired her. All the counselors of the management committee, the heads of the clans for thousands of generations, and those ambitious generals, had to kneel down when they saw her and kiss the instep of her feet. Nobody dared call her by her real name, and nobody knew her real name. It was even unclear how many generations she had inherited the title. She didn't have a title either. Everybody called her that one. The female priest of the Stargate believed that Jingjiu was the new god in the prophecy, but she had to get the approval of that one. This was one of the three purposes for which Jingjiu came to the main planet. The gravitational field of the mansion of the priest clan opened a passage. A silvery, streamlined spaceship left the ground and headed toward the north of the magnificent mountains. The human civilization had entered the interstellar era and possessed endless energy sources. As a result, a streamlined spaceship like this was rarely seen, which gave it a classical beauty. The beautiful silvery spaceship passed the mountains and arrived at a patch of more beautiful prairie. Sitting by the window, Jingjiu looked down and saw many buildings scattered on the prairie. He could smell the gravitational field that he didn't like everywhere. In the next moment, he noticed that there were many heat sources under the prairie. It was unclear if they were the laser guns, the missile platforms, or the heavy ion cannons secretly developed by the military. These buildings were the praying halls on the main planet. The silvery spaceship didn't land here, but kept heading north. After a long while, it arrived at the northernmost Pingmo Plateau. The surface of the plateau was covered with white snow, and patches of moss could be seen once in a while, looking like the paints thrown onto the canvas by the avant-garde artist. In comparison to the ground, the scene in the sky was even more marvelous. Countless snowflakes drifted down from the dark clouds, but they couldn't land on the ground. They were restrained by an invisible force, drifting or flowing slowly along a curved surface. Looking from a distance, it looked like a huge snowball that had been pounded into the ground by a god. Gazing at the surface of the huge snowball, Jingjiu recalled a small toy he had seen in Zhonglizi's apartment. The main preachers of the praying hall on the spaceship were used to seeing such a scene, so they remained calm. It was the first time for Ran Handong to see such a thing. "What is this? Why is it not on the satellite map?" "It's the gravitational field," replied Jingjiu. Judging from the flowing tracks of the snowflakes and the curved surface of the snowball, it was easy to infer that it was the effect of the gravitational field. Ran Handong was very knowledgeable, so she was able to ascertain this fact soon enough, but she still couldn't believe it. How could the surface of the planet have such a powerful gravitational field? She exclaimed. Jingjiu didn't answer her question, and the main preachers of the praying hall didn't explain it either. It took a while before she realized it. That person lived here, so any kind of miraculous phenomenon could happen. The silvery spaceship flew to the front of the huge snowball. The gaps between the alloy plates vibrated at a high frequency. If it continued for a long time, the spaceship would break apart. Fortunately, it didn't take long for a hole to appear on the surface of the huge snowball. The silvery spaceship flew into the hole soundlessly. The scenery outside the window had changed instantly. The snowflakes caused by the strong gravitational field were like the catkins stuck to the surface of the lake, blocking the entire sky. Yet, they didn't block all the sunlight. It was just a bit dark, like a regular cloudy day. There were many mountains in this world, but they were not too high and densely covered with forests. The snowflakes could be seen once in a while, giving off a sense of cold beauty. There was a green lake amid the mountains. The water was calm and smooth, looking like the green sky mirror. If one looked at it in the distance, one could even see the traces of glaciers. It was a beautiful scene. There was a gray building by the lake. Its surface should be made of cement, but it didn't look out of place by the edge of the forest. It was at least much better than the dozen spaceships. Dozens of people stood in front of the gray building, discussing something in a low voice in a few groups. The middle-aged men and women on the left in the dark formal suits are the counselors of the management committee. The old men in casual clothes in the front are the generals in the military. You should have seen my father. Ran Handong followed Jingjiu to the lakeside as she introduced the identities of those people in a low voice. The counselors of the Federation of the Milky Way and the governments of various planets were very cautious about the military and the organization hiding in the shadows. The military was not as united as before, and they all obeyed the orders of General Li. And there were many forces like Ran Donglu who were loyal to the female priest. These important figures came to this plateau in the extreme north that day because they wanted to know the result as soon as possible. If that person really believed that Jingjiu was the new god, they would cooperate with her no matter whether it was a propaganda tactic of the priest clan or something else. Seeing the silvery spaceship land, the important figures looked in his direction, but they didn't move. Jingjiu didn't heed them either. He came to the lakeside under the lead of the main preacher of the praying hall and boarded a fishing boat propelled by the primitive gasoline, heading toward the center of the lake. A straight crack appeared on the mirror-like surface of the lake. The fog in the deep end of the lake was disturbed, but it didn't grow thinner. Instead, it grew thicker. Seeing the fishing boat disappear into the fog on the surface of the lake, Ran Handong crossed her arms reflexively, her eyes full of worry. If he were the new god, he would have won the approval of that person, and he would be fine. If he were the god chosen by that person, he would be even more fine. Ran Donglu came up behind her. Ran Handong turned to her father. She intended to say something, but she didn't know how to start. Noticing her expression, Ran Donglu asked, "What's wrong?" Ran Handong said after a moment of silence, "I don't think he came here to win the approval of that person." The fishing boat entered the fog and soon arrived at the other shore. Jingjiu got off the boat and landed on the shore. After passing a patch of forest, he saw a city. His intuition was correct. The green lake enshrouded by the mountains had a huge generating device for the gravitational field and a high-level protective shield. No one could be seen in the city, and it was soundless. It was like a graveyard. The buildings here were all very tall, usually dozens of stories high. The surfaces of the buildings were strangely covered with glass panels, showing no intention of conserving the energy. The streets between the buildings were also very wide, much wider than those in Shou City and the special district of Capital City. They were wide enough for 100 people to walk side by side. Soon, he found out the reason, because he saw the vehicles parked on both sides of the street. Those vehicles were rusty, as if they would fall apart if he touched them with his hand, but the particles emitting from them could still be detected. These vehicles, like the fishing boat, were powered by the lowest form of biological energy. However, the time of more than 100,000 years was enough for the bones of the big demons at the bottom of the Gathered Soul Valley to turn into powder, but why could these vehicles retain their original shape? The whole city was enshrouded in the faint fog. He was walking in the city. It didn't take long for him to ascertain that this place was a part of the rumored ruins of the distant ancient civilization. There was no generating device for the gravitational field, no nuclear device, and no space elevator in the ruins. Judging from the details, it should be in the early stage of the distant ancient civilization, which was much more backward than the current Federation of the Milky Way. Why did that person choose to live here? It's because this is the world I experienced in the beginning, and it's the time I miss the most. The door of a black car by the street opened slowly. A young woman walked out of the car. Chapter 839. Its black color was inconspicuous, especially in the thin fog. But this black carriage was easily noticed, because it was quite new compared to those abandoned carriages on the street. It must have been well protected. The girl who walked out of the black carriage was also new, both in her flowery dress and the umbrella she held in her hand. She looked as if she had just left the factory, exuding a fresh yet strange aura. This site is isolated under the crust of the plateau, so it's well preserved. Of course, it's been repaired for many years, so these carriages are all new. The girl's voice was calm, devoid of any emotion, like the umbrella in her hand, which didn't move a bit in the breeze. The umbrella covered her face. Jingju's line of sight fell on her feet, and he found she was wearing a pair of ordinary black leather shoes, with furry socks piled around her ankles, looking quite cute. The wind grew stronger, dispersing the fog a bit. It turned out that there was a river not far from the street. Holding the umbrella, the girl walked onto the bridge and crossed the river. Jingju followed behind her. After they got off the bridge, the fog in the city grew thicker, covering the lifeless buildings. The mountain scenery ahead became clearer. There was a courtyard in the mountain, with black eaves and white walls, with flowering trees and residual snow. It was somewhat similar to the scenery garden outside Cloudy Town. There was a hot spring in the deep part of the courtyard, giving off faint hot fog. There was a low square table by the water, with a chair on each side of the table. The girl walked to the edge of the hot spring and sat on the chair. She closed the umbrella in her hand and put it on the ground. The flowery dress was very thin, looking like a bathrobe. It drifted up like the wind and dropped down like the clouds. The flowers on the dress were sunflowers, which reminded Jingju of the oil painting in the Stargate Art Gallery. He sat down on the other chair and looked at the opposite side. The girl's silky black hair was neatly cut, covering her eyebrows like a curtain. It looked like the skin of a watermelon when it was blown by the wind. Her eyebrows were very thin, as if they were drawn. Her nose was very small, and her lips were very red, like cherries. Her face was very white and smooth, like a freshly peeled egg. More precisely, it was like a flawless white porcelain. Shen Yunmai once commented that Jingjiu was like a porcelain doll in the building of the military headquarters. This girl was the real deal. Picturesque eyebrows and eyes did not mean that they were beautiful, because not all paintings were beautiful. Perfect skin did not necessarily represent beauty, because it could be fake. That snow-white face didn't have any anger. Those two thin eyebrows and cherry-like red lips also didn't have any anger. Seeing this face, Jingju thought of the young officer on the Scorching Sun battleship. The girl took out 2 small porcelain bottles and 2 small translucent wine cups from the hot spring, placed them on the short table, and began to pour wine. The scene of a jade-like hand reaching out from her sleeve was very beautiful. His fingers picked up the cup and poured the wine very naturally. The strong amber liquor was no longer pungent after being soaked in the hot spring. All the details exuded a natural and moving aura. Jingju felt that these movements and details were too natural and deliberate. He knew that the girl sitting in front of him was not a real human, nor was she that person's true form. To put it more precisely, the person who was going to talk to him today was not here. She should be somewhere else, or even on another planet. Ordinary people might find it hard to adapt to this kind of conversation, but Jingjiu was used to it. Back when he was in the snowland, the long-distance spiritual communication between him and the snow girl was essentially the same as today's. The first thing to do before any conversation was to know the identity of the other party. Jingjiu was certain that the other party had read the book he wrote, but he still told her his name. "Fei," the girl said softly. Jingjiu didn't know how to respond to this name. "What do you want to ask?" asked the girl. Many people thought that Jingjiu had to be examined by the girl if he wanted to win her approval and become the new god. But it was not the case. It was not the girl who was in charge of asking questions, but Jingjiu. Jingjiu asked a question first. "Where does the standard time refer to?" Jingjiu had written some words on that piece of paper in the underground apartment. Later, he added 2 more words on the paper when he was at the University of Stargate. Those words included a year, a month, and a standard day. There were also some other words. The humans had many planets at the moment, and each planet had a different time for public transit and self-transit, so it had its own time pattern. But the Federation of the Milky Way had a set of standard time when it came to counting the years and traveling in space. Jingjiu had confirmed many times that none of the planets inhabited by humans had a set of standard astronomical rules. The voice of the girl was devoid of any emotion. It seemed that she was not surprised to hear this question. The distant ancient civilization originated from a planet. The standard time is the rule there. Hearing this answer, Jingjiu was not surprised, continuing to ask, "What about the moon?" "That planet has a companion star," said the girl. Jingjiu continued, "I've read about the eclipse of the moon by the heavenly dog or the eclipse of the sun in some books, and I've also seen it there." "It's like what you've seen in your world," said the girl. Jingjiu looked at the hot fog above the hot spring. His line of sight penetrated it, as if he wanted to see the huge snowball outside the gravitational field, the sky outside the snowball, the universe outside the sky, and the other side of the universe. Jingjiu asked, "Where is our world?" The girl picked up the small wine cup with 2 fingers and brought it to her cherry-like lips to take a sip, saying softly, "God can't create the world. He can only discover some new worlds." Jingjiu pulled back his line of sight and asked her snow-white face, "Don't you want to give me a precise answer? Everyone who comes out from your world asks me these questions. You're not special or particularly smart, and you're no different from them. Why do you deserve special treatment from me then?" pressed the girl. Jingjiu put his feet into the hot spring. He did this not to show that he was in a leisurely mood, but for a deeper reason. As for what the deeper reason was, it was unknown for the time being, and nobody asked him about it at the moment. After all, neither Zhuoruzhui nor Guqing had ascended. The girl fixed her line of sight on Jingjiu's feet in the hot spring, asking, "Do you feel anything?" Without turning his head, Jingjiu asked back, "Do you feel anything when you drink wine?" "This body has enough sensory cells," said the girl, "so my senses are richer than those of humans." "I don't feel anything," Jingjiu said. "It's a bit miserable," said the girl. "The lava bath is not bad," said Jingjiu. The girl thought about it and said, "That makes sense." Jingjiu turned around and looked into her eyes, saying, "You see, I'm different from those ascenders." The corners of the girl's mouth curled up at an extremely slow speed, revealing a rather eerie smile, saying, "You want to convince me that you're the same as me?" Chapter 840. "We are the same," said Jingjiu. The young woman said expressionlessly, "In order to gain my approval, you are willing to give up your previous obsession and admit that you are not a human being." It was evident that she had read the book titled, The Path Toward Heaven. "Now that I can become a god, why do I still want to be a human being?" Jingjiu's response was quite interesting. "That's just someone's opinion, it doesn't mean I agree with it." The young woman curled up the corners of her mouth again, letting out a faint smile. The smile was a bit eerie because it was mechanical. Looking at the light snowflakes falling down from the sky, Jingjiu said, "It doesn't matter. As he did so, the hood of the blue hoodie fell off, exposing his face, which was covered by a few snowflakes. He had never been a god, but he had played a similar role. In the eyes of the younger generation and mortals in the cultivation circle of Chaotian, the immortal Jingyang was a god. Since it doesn't matter, why did you come to the main planet and do those things to see me? Asked the young woman. Jingjiu said, becoming a new god will help me achieve my goal. In other words, it's a convenient condition. Do you intend to make use of me? Pressed the young woman. Jingjiu said, I'm good at making use of things. This statement had a profound meaning. It was because of the word things. The young woman didn't get angry. What is your goal? She asked nonchalantly. Jingjiu pulled back his gaze and looked at her pale and lifeless face, saying, cultivating, of course. The young woman asked, the purpose of your cultivation in Chaotian is to ascend. Now that you are here, why do you still want to cultivate? The purpose of ascending is to come out, and the purpose of cultivation is to exist. This answer was the same as what he had said in the illusionary realm of the green sky mirror. The young woman said, the low-speed photons might be the fairy energy you need and can make you stronger, but it has nothing to do with the essence of existence. I don't think this world is the essence either, said Jingjiu. There is no space outside of space, and there is no time outside of time. The young woman said softly, this world will be like this from the beginning of time until the end of time. What about the sea of dark matter? Asked Jingjiu. The girl said, the overflow of dark matter is due to the tearing of the dimensional space. That dark world is also a part of this world. When the snowflakes fell on the surface of the hot spring, they instantly disappeared without a trace. However, when they fell on the two of them, they did not melt. Soon, a shallow layer of snow accumulated. No matter where they fell, the snowflakes made no sound. The courtyard was unusually quiet, and the chilly wind gave people a feeling of despair and indifference. After a long while, Jingjiu gave a response. I don't believe that time has an end. Existence is meaningless. The girl picked up the cup of amber-colored liquor and looked at it in silence for a long time before saying, Shen Yunmai came to see me for the first time when he was 5 years old, and he said the same thing. Jingjiu retracted his feet from the hot spring and stood firmly on the floor. When he was 18, he came here again and sat in this position for an entire night. Then, he cried his heart out and became like this. The girl continued. Jingjiu could understand that kind of despair. The universe had no boundary, but it had a beginning and an end. The beginning was unreasonable, and the end meant that everything was unreasonable. As such, the existence of oneself and the existence of all things would be meaningless. Do you like that child? Jingjiu asked. I like someone who is willing to think and has the ability to think. The girl suddenly asked, why didn't you kill him? Jingjiu said, maybe it's because the way he thinks about these things is similar to how I used to be. If you didn't kill him, how could I trust you? The girl continued nonchalantly while staring into his eyes. The soldiers on that battleship and the immortal Qi song are not enough. Jingjiu said, you know that I'm different from those cocoon breakers. I don't have any ambition. It's not a scheme. A long time ago, there was a cocoon breaker who should have come from the same place as you. He refused to be recruited by the cocoon breakers of the previous generation, and he even helped me kill many people. The girl continued, in fact, he merely wanted to gain my approval and control me, but I've seen through him. And then? Jingjiu asked. The girl didn't answer this question, but said, if you want me to trust you, you have to give me one of their heads, no matter whether it's Shun Yunmai or General Li. At first, I did have this idea. Jingjiu went on, but at the last moment I suddenly thought, why do I need your approval? The girl said, you don't like the way those cocoon breakers do things, and you've become enemies with them, at least on the surface. And according to what you said, you need this civilization to help you achieve your goal. Jingjiu said, But your civilization also needs me to resist the control of those ascendants. To put it more precisely, you need me to guarantee your independent existence." The girl gently put down the wine cup. As she did so, the snowflakes fell down, revealing the broken flowers on her bathrobe. This was the truth. The snowflakes continued to fall down soundlessly. They disappeared instantly like willow catkins. The courtyard became absolutely quiet. He looked at the snowflakes falling down from the sky. She looked at the snowflakes falling into the lake. They sat opposite each other in silence. Time passed slowly. The hot fog on the surface of the lake gradually dispersed. The light in the sky changed. It was unclear how much time had passed. The girl said, "Let's have a cup of wine again when we have time." Jingju agreed and got up, heading toward the outside of the courtyard. The hot spring courtyard was located on a mountain, and there was a river outside the mountain. On the other side of the river was a city left by the distant ancient civilization. There was a large lake on the other side of the city, which was full of fog. The real world was on the other side of the fog. The buildings scattered by the lake had a sense of history, and the important figures standing in the buildings were a part of the history. Looking at the thick fog on the lake, these important figures felt nervous, or rather, complicated. That person was the most mysterious being in this world. Nobody had ever seen her in person. Could Jingju see her? What would be the outcome of the conversation that day? The thick fog was suddenly broken, and the old boat came out from the inside. Dozens of gazes followed the boat to the shore, and then fell on the youth wearing a blue hoodie. Jingju didn't pay attention to them. He walked toward the silver spaceship in the distance. Ran Handong followed him hastily after shooting a glance at her father. The cold wind whistled, ruffling the grass by the lake. The spaceship headed toward the sky and soon disappeared into the snowy layer in the high sky. Seeing the scene, the important figures were startled, wondering if the spaceship had left just like that. "Brother Donglu, what's going on?" A head of an aristocratic clan walked to the side of General Ran and asked, "What is the outcome?" "No outcome means nothing has been decided yet," said Ran Donglu expressionlessly. Then, he looked at the counselor walking over with the head of the clan, saying, "We have to do what we have to do." The counselor asked with raised eyebrows, "Is it meaningful? That article, those documents, and this game are all a coincidence." Ran Donglu went on, "The so-called coincidence is sometimes a chance, even if it's only temporary." The counselor remained silent. The head of an aristocratic clan raised his eyebrows, indicating that he didn't agree with this statement. Looking at the counselors and the important figures in the military not far away, Ran Donglu asked emotionlessly, "What's their attitude? They don't understand." The head of an aristocratic clan said without hesitation, "It's true that the military has been too tough over the years, but the situation is still under control. Because of the arrival of that person, we suddenly have to choose a side. They don't understand, and neither do I. Not many people are willing to believe the information from the praying hall." The term God was beyond the scope of the mortal world. Who was that youth wearing a blue hoodie? The praying hall and the government had isolated the manor well. Nobody could get close to Jingjiu, let alone find out anything about him. Neither this head of an aristocratic clan nor other important figures knew the background of Jingjiu. Why did they take such a risk and disrupt the peace of the Federation of the Milky Way for this person? The counselor knew something about the Stargate base, but he couldn't give an explanation. "I don't know his identity or what that article means, but the game will be popularized in a short time. We need to find out how he will react. Most importantly, we need to find out how those people will react after they enter the game. We need to collect the data." Ran Donglu's line of sight followed the disappearing silvery spaceship into the deep part of the snowy cloud, as he said, "It's the best opportunity to find out the advantages and disadvantages of those people." Young Master Shin promised not to touch him for 60 days. There are only 50 days left. And in a few days, The cloudy battleship will arrive on the main planet. The head of an aristocratic clan went on with furrowed brows. If he dies, what's the point of doing all this? Take care of your health. Remember to wear masks and go out less. Don't look down on others. No matter what you do, staying healthy is the prerequisite. Chapter 841. The silvery spaceship broke through the snowball and returned to the main planet. It didn't take long for it to pass through the mountains and countless gazes in the praying hall and return to the manor. The silvery ashes in the stove exuded a warm red glow. The green tea in the iron kettle was poured into a glass cup, giving off a warm mist along with a faint fragrance. Jingju picked up the teacup and had a sip. He lifted his head to look at the lawn outside the deck and the flowering trees in the distance. It was unclear what he was thinking. She looked at Jingju with widened eyes. As she was about to ask him something, she was dragged out of the room by Jiang Yuxia. What kind of person is that person? Zhong Lizi couldn't help but ask out of curiosity after a moment of hesitation. Jingju pulled back his gaze and looked at the tea in the cup. After a moment of silence, he said, "Someone like me." The young woman with long black hair, and wearing a bathrobe with floral embroidery, and sitting by the hot spring drinking the strong liquor, was a biochemical person, or a robot. As such, the person hiding behind her must be someone like him. Standing behind Jingju, Ran Handong showed no expression on her face, her lips pressed tightly together, looking like a secretary who had no self-awareness. She was fully aware that Jingju didn't care about the opinion of that person. If he were a true god, he wouldn't need the approval of others. But why did he want to meet that person in a hurry? This is a world controlled by the Ascendants, or the Cocoon Breakers, as you know. Jingju continued to Ran Handong. The female priests and the people of the Federation of the Milky Way represented by your father don't like the current situation. They need me. He had no intention of concealing it from Zhong Lizi, but Zhong Lizi couldn't understand what he meant. She opened her mouth slightly, her face full of bewilderment. Ran Handong said in a slightly nervous voice, "My father and the others probably didn't think of changing the situation so quickly, and that person probably didn't either. It's you who forced them to make a choice." Jingju said, "Time is the most precious thing. We shouldn't waste it on guessing and wavering. Now that we have an idea, we should realize it as soon as possible." Ran Handong pressed, "Do you feel pressured because the cloudy battleship is coming back?" Jingju said, "I can change direction at any time." Ran Handong had guessed that Jingju came from the same place as those cocoon breakers, but she didn't expect him to actually consider it. "You've destroyed that battleship and killed so many people, and you've almost killed Shin Yunmai. Do you think they will accept you?" Jingju said, "I can destroy that battleship and kill so many people, and I can kill Shin Yunmai at any time. That's more valuable than everything else." Everyone knew that the youth in the blue hoodie was very valuable. His origins were very mysterious, as though he had appeared out of thin air. He possessed a realm and strength unimaginable in this universe. He went to the building of the military department and severely wounded Shen Yunmai, the greatest pride of the military of the Alliance, under the gaze of numerous people and heavy weapons. He went to the ancient civilization ruins shrouded in thick fog and had a conversation with that person that no one knew about. Then, he returned unscathed. However, this did not mean that no one dared to kill him. That person hadn't expressed his position yet, and the praying hall hadn't acknowledged his identity. Billions of believers didn't know of his existence. The military of the Alliance wouldn't do anything to him in 60 days because of Shen Yunmai's promise, but the cloudy battleship was on its way back. How would the supreme commander of the military treat him? As everybody was pondering these questions nervously, Jingju was thinking of something else. Even though billions of stars shone on him, the deep end of the universe was still dark, like the gloomy future at the end of time. According to the calculation of the Science Academy of the Federation, the mass of the universe was still insufficient even if the dark matter and antimatter were taken into account. As a result, it was impossible for the seemingly monotonous cycle to take place. Everything would be destroyed. As such, everything would be meaningless. It was because life was short and would come to an end. Even billions of years were too short for eternity. It was the same for life. This was the greatest sorrow of the intelligent beings, the source of Shen Yunmai's madness, and the ultimate problem that Jing Jiu had been trying to solve. As he was thinking of all this, Jing Jiu was not on the deck chair in the mansion of the priest clan, but on a satellite. It was a military satellite. All the instruments and devices were installed in a semi-transparent cover, the surface of which was very smooth. If it weren't for the absence of gravity, it would be difficult for him to lie on the satellite quietly. Looking at the permanent star in the distance, Jing Jiu narrowed his eyes. The permanent star should have 11 billion years left to live, but it was still not enough. The glow of the permanent star brought some warmth, but it was soon taken away by the cold intent in the universe. It reminded him of the snowland in Chaotian. Jing Jiu operated the magic method silently with his eyes closed. The bright light rays turned into tiny golden particles invisible to the naked eye when they shone on his face and body. They seeped into his skin soundlessly and then deepened. They didn't refract or resist, which was completely different from the physical phenomenon in the laboratory. The broken light rays were absorbed into his body like flowing water. The whole process was peaceful, but it was beautiful. It was like the line in the poem. After a long while, Jing Jiu opened his eyes. A flash of golden light flashed in the deep end of his eyes, but it soon disappeared. It was like a shooting star streaking across the night sky, or like a flower blooming in the transparent glass. The broken light rays were no longer glittering like the crystal shavings. They disappeared into his body and became the fairy energy needed by the cultivation practitioners. The space was not isolated by the atmosphere or the protective shield, and the distance to the permanent star was relatively close, so it was much faster for him to absorb the fairy energy. In less than 2 hours, he had absorbed a sufficient amount of immortal qi. The fairy energy consumed by killing the immortal Qi Song, destroying that battleship, and fighting against Shin Yunmai had all been replenished. The cloudy battleship would arrive on the main planet soon. He had to be in the best condition to face generally, both in terms of his spiritual energy and fairy energy. He turned around and flew toward the main planet. The satellite was left at its original spot. The figures of the space stations could be seen not far away, and many thin lines could be seen further away, which were all space elevators. Many observation devices were aimed at the seemingly ordinary satellite. It was because Jing Jiu had lain there for a long time. The swordsman in the star state of the Federation of the Milky Way could stay in the space or on the surface of a planet without an atmosphere for a long time, but nobody was willing to do so, because the invisible cosmic rays were a threat. The space agency of the Federation government and the battleships responsible for the defense of the entire star region must have been analyzing the scene that had just occurred. What was he doing? The side of the main planet facing the permanent star was very bright, and it was daytime. The other side was very dark, and it was still night. A bright light suddenly appeared in the dark world, which looked like a sword light in a game or a shooting star. The scene appeared on countless light screens. A few private TV stations noticed it and started to broadcast it live. The battleships and the officials of the space agency knew what the shooting star-like light was. There was no alarm, and there was no sound of space weapons being activated. The world was still as quiet as before. Seeing the shooting star land somewhere in the north of the planet, many people had a peculiar feeling. This was the era of the explosion of science and technology, the modification of genes, and the cultivation of martial arts. Many swordsmen emerged, but they were merely a part of the interplanetary civilization. It was evident that the person represented by the shooting star and the sword light was more than that. The lawn was illuminated for a moment, and then returned to normal. The discussions outside the courtyard stopped abruptly, and then started again, but in a much lower volume. Zhonglizi helped Jingju put on his clothes and straightened his collar. Then, she turned around and poured a cup of tea with the right temperature for him. As the successor of the female priest of the Stargate, she served Jingju like a maid. In the beginning, many people in the priest manor felt shocked and even angry, but they didn't pay any attention to her now. Ran Handong walked to the side of the chair and brought out the light screen, as if she hadn't seen the scene. She started reporting according to the data on the screen. The believers in all the cities on the main planet have started the candlelight procession. Nobody mentioned your name, but they should all know it in secret. She continued after a pause. If that person expresses his opinion, the praying hall should be able to convince more than 70% of the believers to accept it in 20 standard days. She was talking about the prophecy of the new god. Jingju uttered, There is a list here. Take a look at it. Many people wanted to meet Jingju recently, and they were all important figures in the Federation of the Milky Way, like the heads of those clans, the counselors, and the generals. But she couldn't make the decision for some of them. As such, she insisted on letting Jingzhou have a look at the list even though she knew that he would refuse it. Jingzhou took a look at the list. As he was about to say that he didn't want to meet anybody like he had done 2 days ago, he suddenly saw a familiar name. The reason he was familiar with the name wasn't because he had seen it somewhere, but because he had signed it himself. Those who came to the mansion of the priest clan to visit Jingzhou were those who thought they were qualified to visit him, and those who were qualified to pass the investigation of Ran Handong and bring their names to Jingzhou must be some important figures. For instance, they were the female priest who came from an important planet and the third commander of the Central Star Fleet. Sha Yu was a counselor of the Administrative Committee of the Federation, though he was not a senior member. He was the owner of a large gaming company and had a great amount of wealth, but he was not so important in terms of strategy. Normally, his name was not qualified to appear on the list. Fortunately, Ran Handong knew who he was and some other information. The name of the large gaming company was the Twirling Rain. Zhonglizi handed him a cup of tea and glanced at him, but she didn't find anything special about him. Why did he choose the path toward heaven, at first glance, and spend so much money and resources to modify it into the current game? If Jingzhou was indeed the new god in the prophecy, it would undoubtedly be the most significant venture investment in the history of mankind. Sha Yu was aware of Zhonglizi's identity. He took the teacup with both of his hands and said to Jingzhou softly, "We've collected some data according to Mr. Donglo's request." Jingzhou knew what the data collection was, wondering if the Snow Girl was among them. "Everyone is fine." Chapter 842. Hearing what Sha Yu said, Ran Handong felt surprised, wondering what it was that had something to do with her father. If it was her father's idea to collect the data, why did this Chairman Sha visit her according to the usual procedure instead of using his family connections to find her? Sha Yu didn't explain it to her, and Ran Handong didn't ask about it either. It meant that this matter was very important and confidential, and nobody should know about it. "Thanks for your hard work," said Jingzhou. Sha Yu took out the chip from his bracelet and put it on the tea table. As he got up and was about to leave, he couldn't help but ask, "May I ask, why did you choose the Twirling Rain Company back then?" The Twirling Rain Company was indeed the largest gaming company on the Stargate base, but there were at least 3 other gaming companies of the same level in the Federation of the Milky Way, and all of them were backed by powerful families. If Jingzhou intended to do something in the Federation of the Milky Way, those gaming companies were a better choice than the Twirling Rain Company. Jingzhou didn't give him an answer. Sha Yu left regretfully. Looking at the chip on the tea table, Ran Handong asked, "What's this?" "See you on the internet." Jingzhou got up and went to the room next door. There was a gaming cabin of the latest model in the room. He entered the gaming cabin and logged into the game, The Path Toward Heaven. He hadn't logged into the game since the first few days he spent in the hotel of the University of Stargate. He connected to the internet and logged into the game. As a result, the regular players disappeared from his site after he filtered the data and blocked them. As a result, he felt the scenery was much better. The chip was placed in the ring and connected to the central server of the Twirling Rain Company. A great deal of data fell down like a waterfall on the screen with the peaks of Aoyama as the background. These data were the basic information of the players. The Twirling Rain Company had picked out thousands of suspicious accounts after analyzing the data. The suspicious accounts were those accounts that fit the conditions set by Ran Donglu. Even Sha Yu and the technical department of the Twirling Rain Company didn't know what those conditions meant. Those accounts might have stayed in Aoyama for a long time, or been in a daze outside a manor cave, or flown up in the ocean of clouds on their swords like madmen. It was true that Jing Jiu intended to find other ascendants of Chaotian through this game. No matter how heartless the cultivation practitioners were, who would miss the opportunity to see Chaotian where they had lived for a great many years. He just didn't expect Ran Donglu to guess his hidden intention. Of course, not all of these thousands of players were ascenders. According to his calculation, there should be 10 ascendants in the Federation of the Milky Way, and more than half of them would be attracted by this game. The mist flowed out of the peaks and formed a mass in the courtyard by the stream outside the town, obscuring the view from the outside. Suddenly, there was a breeze, and a water wheel was slowly turning on the stream. It was unclear when Ran Handong had sat on it. The stream water fell down noisily. It was a ridiculous scene. I thought it was a Ferris wheel. The female officer's face was a little red as she forcefully suppressed her annoyance. We don't have a Ferris wheel there. Jingju waved his hand to summon the data waterfall into the fog and said, "Let's begin." Ran Handong was the most outstanding cloud ghost in the Federation of the Milky Way, to say nothing of Jingjiu. It didn't take long before they found more than 30 key suspects from thousands of player accounts. Jingjiu kicked Ran Handong out of the game without hesitation and started comparing the accounts with those 30 players. Those players were scattered in many places in the Federation of the Milky Way. Some of them were even on the most primitive planets. It was quiet in the gaming cabin. Jingjiu wore the interactive system with his eyes closed, as if he had fallen asleep. The ring on his finger emitted a faint glow. His awareness drifted along the interplanetary network along with the data flow, passing through those small warped black holes and traveling back and forth among countless galaxies at a speed faster than the speed of light. He hacked into the terminals of those players to find the evidence that they were ascenders. Some of the players looked special and even abnormal, but they were from the Federation of the Milky Way, so Jingju didn't care about them. Some of the players looked ordinary and inconspicuous, but Jingjiu had memorized their locations and marked them digitally. Unfortunately, he didn't find the Immortal Tan or the Snow Girl. The scenery garden in the game had the everlasting flowers, but it didn't have the everlasting hot pot. It was probably for this reason that the fog didn't last long, and the taste was not so good. Jingju didn't go to Cloudy Town to eat the hot pot. He rode the sword up against the clouds and returned to Aoyama, landing on the peak with the thickest fog. Yunxing Peak was also the sword peak. This was the place where the all-in-one sword had first appeared, and it was also the foundation of the Aoyama sect. Even though the information was not blocked, the number of players here was still small. It was because the life here was too boring, and the perception feedback was quite uncomfortable. The uncomfortable perception feedback was the reality of the sword peak, or in other words, daily life. Zhao Leu could cultivate diligently here for many years because she had a strong willpower. Jingjiu could stay here because the formidable sword wills couldn't hurt him. The regular players couldn't stand the sword wills. As such, the young woman in the white dress with floral petals was quite eye-catching among the desolate cliffs. The mountain wind blew over once in a while, bringing with it the cries of the iron eagles. Her black hair was tousled, exposing her snow-white, picturesque face that didn't seem to exist. Jingju walked to her side and followed her line of sight. There were 3 caves on the cliff wall, about 2 feet above the ground, which were convenient for sitting in. One was his, one was Zhao Liu's, and the last one was Ping Yongka's. At the moment, Ping Yongka in the game was sleeping with his eyes closed in the cave, or in other words, cultivating in meditation. The young woman looked at him for a long time and suddenly said, "He looks really ugly." Though Jingjiu could predict everything that had happened in Aoyama in the last 100 years, he couldn't predict that she would have such an evaluation of the sword spirit of the all-in-one sword. He uttered to express his bewilderment. To some extent, our existence, be it in the external world or the spiritual world, is an imitation of the human beings. The young woman went on, "So you're very beautiful, and so am I. Why did he turn himself into an ugly fat man?" Jingju said, "Maybe he didn't think that he was learning and imitating the human beings. He thought he was a human being, so he didn't have any requirements for his appearance." Looking at Ping Yongka in the cave, the young woman said, "I don't agree with your opinion. It's because you're a human being, and he and I are the same." "Should I ask him to come out and meet you?" asked Jingjiu. The young woman didn't respond to him, but asked, "Did you tell Ran Handong that you would join the other side if I didn't support you?" Jingjiu said, "It's not joining the other side, it's returning." The young woman said, "You've killed an important member of theirs. Do you think they will accept you?" Jingjiu turned around and walked to the edge of the cliff wall. He looked through the clouds and fog at the iron eagles flying in the outside world and the sword lights designed by the game in the distance. The young woman walked to Jingjiu's side and looked at the outside world. As far as she could see, the clouds and fog had dispersed, exposing the blue sky and the pleasant green fields of Aoyama. The path toward heaven employed the central system of data partitioning. The key data were stored in the storage device of the Twirling Rain Company. The regular players couldn't modify the data privately. However, both the storage device and the data partitioning were in the world of data and a part of the interplanetary network. She was the true god here, so she was omnipotent and could see whatever she wanted. "This is Aoyama." Jingjiu went on, "I'm from the same sect as them. They have no reason to abandon me because of a scoundrel of the Bloody Demon Church." The young woman pressed, "Why should I believe that you will betray them?" Jingjiu didn't say anything. He reached out his right hand and pointed at the distance. A blue bird flew over from the distance and landed on his palm. Looking at the blue bird, the young woman said after a long moment of silence, "If the cooperation is successful, give me the green sky mirror." This blue bird was not the real Qing'er. It looked at the young woman curiously with its dark eyes, unaware that it could be sold by Jingjiu at any moment. "Okay," said Jingjiu. The blue bird turned around and shot him a glance. The world in the game was indeed similar to the real world, especially the peaks of Aoyama. It was probably because Jingjiu had lived here for too many years. Shinma Peak pointed at the sky in the distance. The Shanghai Peak was covered with snow. Shuriwa Peak and Shilai Peak looked at each other, speechless. The singing could be heard vaguely on Qingrong Peak. The ocean of clouds on Tianguang Peak was as close as ever, and yet it was so far away. It seemed to be right in front of them. They sat by the cliff's edge, but their feet couldn't reach the top of the cliff. Jingjiu sat by the cliff's edge for a while, waiting for that person to arrive. "The scenery is the same as yesterday." General Li walked out from the hut. According to the design in the game, he didn't wear the military uniform, nor did he wear the red overcoat. He wore a plain sword robe, looking a bit similar to Lu Ci. They were both the sect masters of the Aoyama sect, so it was not surprising that they looked similar. Jingjiu stood up and bowed to him. On New Year's Eve, I salute to everyone. I wish everyone good health, a happy family, and a carefree life. As usual, I'll take a break tomorrow. The update will resume on the 16th day of the first lunar month. I love you all very much. Chapter 843. Jingjiu had not saluted for many years. His grandmaster, Reverend Daoyuan, left very early, and his master, Reverend Chinzhou, soon followed suit. Those martial uncles in Aoyama were either killed by him and his senior martial brother, or imprisoned in the sword jail. Since then, he had become the person of the highest generation in Chaotian, so he had no need to bow to anybody. However, General Li's seniority was much higher than his. General Li's full name was Li Chunyang. His Taoist name was the Immortal Chunyang when he was in Chaotian. It was the Chunyang Jinren who joined hands with a certain emperor to defeat the underworld army in Ozawa, and thus brought peace between the human world and the underworld for 2,000 years. Chunyang Jinren was the 14th sect master of Aoyama sect, the last sword celestial to ascend, and the master of Dao Yuan Jinren. Li was a common family name, and 5 of the ascendants in Chaotian had the surname Li. Jingjiu had thought of these 4 at the beginning, but he didn't expect the immortal Chunyang to be one of them. It had nothing to do with any other reason. He just did not want this matter to be related to the ascenders of Aoyama, and he did not want to face his great-grandmaster. Whether he wanted to or not, he had to accept this fact the moment he saw General Li at Tianguang Peak. By the time the immortal Daoyuan brought him back to Aoyama from the royal palace of Zhaoga City, the immortal Chunyang had already ascended. He had never seen this great grandmaster teacher before, but he had seen his portrait in that small building. Naturally, he would not be mistaken. The swordsmanship of the immortal Chunyang was exceedingly powerful and as profound as the ocean, not inferior to that of Jingjiu. After he ascended and became the ruler of the Federation of the Milky Way, his cultivation state must have improved. More importantly, this was the Grandmaster. What else was there to fight for? A gust of wind blew through the thatched hut at the top of Tianguang Peak. It came to the edge of the cliff and lifted the sleeves of the 2. The sea of clouds at the bottom of the cliff was slightly disturbed. It was unknown whether Jingjiu, who was still maintaining his saluting posture, felt the same. There was no sound in the wind, no breathing, and no narration in the game. Fortunately, this silence did not last for too long. General Li walked to the edge of the cliff and looked at the peaks under the sun with his hands behind his back. After his cultivation, he was called Immortal Chunyang. After his ascension, he was called General Li. There was a sense of separation between yin and yang, just like the sky and the night. I've always thought that little Taoist would be able to ascend, but I've been waiting here for several years, and he still hasn't appeared. Li Chunyang said emotionally, "Only after reading the book you wrote did I realize that so many things had happened." Among the elders in Aoyama, the one Jingjiu was most familiar with was not his own master, but his Grand Master, Reverend Daoyuan. With Reverend Daoyuan's cultivation base and talent, it would not be difficult for him to ascend and become an immortal. Unfortunately, he could not help but sigh when he thought of the stories from over 1,000 years ago. "Did you really kill that traitor from the South Sea?" Li Chunyang turned to look at him. Jingjiu said, "I joined hands with Lu Ci to kill them." Li Chunyang said, "This junior Lu Ci is also not bad. What a pity." It was indeed a pity. With the foundation of Aoyama sect, if not for so many incidents, there would have been at least 3 more sword deities who had ascended apart from Jingjiu. Jingjiu said, "There have always been such pitiful things." Clearly, the 2 of them did not mean the same thing when they said it was a pity. Li Chunyang was silent for a while, then said, "Did you have any results when you met with her?" Jingjiu said, "No. You are a disciple of Aoyama. Even if Qi Song and that warship were destroyed by your sword, she would not believe you." Li Chunyang said, "Unless you write that we are from Machen Peak in the story, perhaps we can still change this sea of stars." His words seemed indifferent, but they were actually majestic. He was like a whale that had suddenly leaped out of the sea, as if he wanted to swallow everything in the world. In the story of the path toward heaven, in the real world, from the Grand Master of Aoyama to Li Chunyang, and then to Daoyuan, Chenzhou, Taiping, and Jingyang, the orthodoxy continued. If those who ascended before Daoyuan were all from Machen Peak, then there would be an irreconcilable hatred between them and Jingjiu. The seemingly nonsensical words hid many meanings and possibilities of calculation. Jingjiu naturally understood them. "I don't lie," he said. Not lying meant he was confident, because he didn't need to. Of course, if one day he needed to lie, he would be able to do it very well. "So, the Cloud Dream Mountain has really been subdued by you?" Li Chunyang gave him a deep look. Jingjiu thought that with Tong Yan's ability, she would definitely be able to control the Cloud Dream Mountain with the help of Zhao Liu and the others. "That should be the case," he said. Li Chunyang thought of the power of the Bai family 2,000 years ago and said with relief, "I didn't expect that you, a junior, would be able to accomplish what we seniors couldn't." Jingjiu didn't want to say anything modest, because that would be too hypocritical. But he also didn't want to say anything complacent, because that would be too smug. As such, he didn't respond. The Twirling Rain Company had done a great job in the game. As the sun moved, the brightness of the sky changed naturally. The shadows of the peaks and the colors of the sea of clouds also changed subtly, looking very pleasing to the eye. Looking at the picturesque scenery, Li Chunyang felt a little nostalgic, saying, "It's interesting. Why didn't we think of that?" "I'm quite free," Jingjiu said. "I'll arrive tomorrow. We'll talk about the details when we meet," Li Chunyang said, turned around and walked toward the thatched hut. Soon, he turned into a flowing light and disappeared. This place wasn't the real Aoyama, but the Aoyama in the game, a part of the online world. It would be hard for him to hide anything he said here from the young girl. Looking at the empty thatched hut, Jingjiu fell silent for a while. Then he walked up to the stone monument, patted the thick shell of the stone turtle lightly, and quit the game as well. The door of the gaming cabin was opened, and Jingjiu walked out from it. Ran Handong was doing some calculations. Zhong Lizi, Jiang Yuxia and Hua Shi were reading something in the next room. It was probably the homework of the College of Priests. Hearing the sound of the cabin door opening, Zhong Lizi stood up and walked to the door to greet him. Jiang Yuxia got up and was about to boil the tea in the iron kettle. Hua Shi opened her eyes wide, not knowing what she should do. Jingjiu shot Hua Shi a glance. Hua Shi felt a bit shy and nervous as she bowed to Jingjiu and greeted him. Jingjiu didn't say anything. He led Zhong Lizi out of the small building, passing through the lawn and arriving at the manor house. There was a staircase leading to the underground at the deep end of the lawn. It was quiet in the underground passage, devoid of wind, and no floating train came over. "Where are you going?" asked Zhong Lizi curiously after taking the black backpack from Jingjiu. "I want to find a quiet place." Having said this, Jingjiu left. There were small holes on the edge of the floating track for collecting rainwater. The sword wills in the holes soon turned cold. As far as the humans and other intelligent beings were concerned, the planets were their homes. The happy families were all similar, and the planets suitable for the humans to live on were almost the same. The main planet, the Stargate base, and even Chaotian had a similar geological structure. However, the world in Chaotian was twisted into an unbroken plane by the different rules of space, and the Stargate base was turned into a hollow ivory sculpture ball by the distant ancient civilization. The main planet was the only one that retained the original appearance of most of the planet. The deeper one went into the underground, the greater the pressure, the denser the materials and the higher the temperature. The lava was everywhere, red and warm, like the molten iron in the blacksmith's shop. The magma was boiling hot. No, this description was not accurate. It should be extremely hot and blazing. Jingjiu was soaked in the lava, with only his head exposed to the air. Sensing the pressure and temperature on his skin, he let out a comfortable sigh. He had lived in this strange universe for more than 100 days and encountered some troublesome issues. As a result, he followed Zhong Lizi to the main planet. The environment here was familiar and even intimate to him. It reminded him of the bottom of the Gathered Soul Valley, and he even had the illusion that he was a fetus. The lava in the distance burst out like flowers, looking like the fireworks in the night sky or the nuclear bombs exploding in the universe. Jingjiu looked at these scenes in silence. It was unclear what was on his mind. After a certain number of flowers had bloomed, Jingjiu closed his eyes and sank into the lava. The dim surface of the lava broke apart, and the fresh lava gushed out. The lava was as red as fire, looking like the sword light of the thoughtless sword. The spring festival is over. I hope everything will be over soon. I wish you all good health and don't have to think about anything you don't want to think about. I wish you all a happier life than Jingjiu. I don't want to say anything else. If everything gets better, let's talk a little more when we start to forget each other many days later. Chapter 844. Squatting in the underground passage, Zhong Lizi stared at the rainwater collecting hole with the remaining faint sword wills, looking like a bored young girl squatting under a tree and looking at Ant. The main preachers of the priest manor and the officials of the government were left outside. Some of them asked her a few questions, but they didn't get any response. She had no idea where Jingjiu had gone or how long she would have to wait here. All she knew was that Jingjiu had a mental problem, and he didn't get better after meeting that person. So she was worried. "What are you looking at?" Unexpectedly, it didn't take long before Jingjiu's voice rang out behind her. Zhong Lizi was startled. She turned around and shot a glance at Jingjiu, and then looked at the rainwater collecting hole by the track. "How come you're here so soon?" she asked, opening her mouth. "It's fine as long as I'm here. I don't need to worry about the time." Jingjiu had always been patient with her. Time was relative. All he needed was a quiet and isolated environment to think about something and relax his mind. A few minutes and a few decades made no difference. Zhong Lizi took out the clothes she had prepared and helped Jingjiu put them on. The two of them returned to the lawn from the underground. The main preachers of the praying hall and the officials of the government had left a long time ago, as if they had never waited here nervously. The huge permanent star was hanging on the horizon. The bright light looked a bit bluish after being filtered by the protective shield. The light shone on the buildings and the lawn in the manor, looking like the starlight that was a few hundred times brighter. "How have you been studying these days?" asked Jingjiu. This question seemed to be casual, like the concern between friends, but it startled Zhong Lizi. Such a conversation had never occurred in the underground community or at the University of Stargate. This was a rare thing for Jingjiu. It was well known that he cared about the world, but he wouldn't express it verbally even if he did. "Well, it's very difficult." Thinking of the courses she had to attend in the last few days, Zhong Lizi felt a headache coming on. As her personal attendants, Jiang Yuxia and Hua Shi had less to learn than her, and they were geniuses whose genes had been modified. Even so, it was still very difficult for them, not to mention Zhong Lizi. "In fact, I've been wondering why I have to memorize the art knowledge even though some inheritances need to be kept a secret," she said with a blank expression. "I can't even memorize the chronology, let alone the specific content." Jingjiu asked, "How did you study?" Zhong Lizi said, "There is a quiet room in the institute. As long as you sit in it and meditate, many knowledge fragments will enter your mind." Logically speaking, this was the absolute secret of the priestesses. She could not tell anyone. However, since Jingjiu had asked, she would definitely tell him. The inheritance of the priestess had always been passed down by word of mouth, and not written down. This had been criticized and questioned countless times. In the early years, the priestesses could not gain the trust of the human masses, and this had something to do with it. Even in modern times, many people, including those who surrendered, still used this to attack the priestesses. The distant ancient civilization had an exceedingly magnificent culture and advanced technology, but why didn't the female priests reveal all of them to help the humans of the new era develop better and fight against the sea of dark matter? No matter how one looked at it, this didn't make any sense, and it was easy to infer that it was unfavorable to the priestesses. She doesn't believe in humans. This was the explanation given by Jingjiu. Zhong Lizi guessed who he was referring to, and halted her steps in surprise. Jingjiu continued, including you people. Looking at a lone tree in the deep end of the grass, Zhong Lizi didn't know what to say. The huge sun sank below the horizon. The stars in the night sky grew brighter instantly, though the brightness was not much different from before. The tree bathed in the starlight looked a bit more sacred and lonelier. Zhong Lizi asked softly, "So, you didn't get along well with that person?" "No, I don't believe in her either," said Jingjiu. Though the young woman named Fei didn't believe in the ascendants from Chaotian, Jingjiu was nevertheless different. In the story, The Path Toward Heaven, the Green Sky Mirror and the All-in-One, Qing and Ping Yongka, and the Snow Girl had all proved this point. Zhong Lizi realized what Jingjiu meant after being taken aback for a moment. She suddenly felt that Jingjiu's figure had become lonelier, like the tree in the grass. Many years ago at the plum meeting in Zhaoga City, Jingjiu heard the zither music played by Lian Sanyue. Zhao Layer had a similar feeling when she looked at Jingjiu. Her gaze fell on Jingjiu's earlobe, and she noticed that the gap had become very smooth. It would be hard to notice if she didn't compare it with the other protruding ear. It was probably because Jingjiu had touched it with his hand a lot recently. Why did he often touch his earlobe with his hand? It was because he was a bit upset. How could he solve his problem? His finger was not there. "Are you okay?" asked Zhong Lizi. Jingjiu didn't answer her question. He took out an object and handed it to Zhong Lizi, saying, "If something happens to you, burn it." It was a paper crane made of yellow paper. It was inauspicious regardless of its material, shape, or the word burn. Looking at Jingjiu, Zhong Lizi asked in a trembling voice, "What could happen to me?" Jingjiu said, "It's none of your business. Don't ask." From that apartment building to the hotel at the University of Stargate, and then to this manor, Jingjiu had brought many changes to her, but he didn't intend to change her completely. For instance, he used the fairy energy to temper her body, but he didn't intend to teach her the cultivation method. The humans in this world were not suitable to cultivate the magic methods of Chaotian, and Zhong Lizi's talent was ordinary, but these were not the real reasons. Jingjiu didn't want her to know too many things and have too much connection with him. In this way, she would have a chance to leave when something happened to him. It was true. It was the first time that Jingjiu wondered if something would happen to him. Yet, it didn't mean that he had lost his confidence. He still thought that he was the strongest ascendant from Chaotian, save for the Snow Girl. Yet, it was different this time. The next morning. The sun hadn't risen yet. The stars were not as bright as they had been before midnight. It was quiet in the manor house. The insects in the meadow were making their last chirping of the day. Ran Handong, who had stayed up all night, washed her face with cold water and employed the jinshi in her body to pull herself together. Then she knocked on the door of the room. Jingjiu got up from the chair, picked up the black backpack, and headed for the outside of the door. Zhong Lizi couldn't sleep well last night, thinking of the mishap Jingjiu had mentioned. She didn't fall asleep until the early hours of the morning, and she was woken up by the knocking on the door. She rubbed her eyes and woke up instantly when she saw Jingjiu's figure. "Where are you going?" she asked after sitting up in bed. "To meet someone." Jingjiu didn't explain further. He put on the backpack and pulled up the hood of the blue hoodie to block his eyes and brows. Ran Handong smiled at Zonglizi and closed the door. She put on the military cap and followed Jingjiu at a faster pace. The chilly wind blew over from the deep end of the steps, ruffling the grass pieces in the air. The floating train had already left. Standing on the deck and looking at the scene in the distance, Zonglizi tightened the pajamas on her body reflexively. Jiang Yuxia and Hua Shi walked into the room after hearing the commotion. Zonglizi waved her hand to indicate that nothing had happened. Jiang Yixia glanced at her worriedly. Hua Shi walked to the railing and looked at the grass pieces dancing in the wind with wide eyes. Her small face displayed an innocent expression. It was unclear what was on her mind. It was unclear where the floating train had stopped, and the attendants had no idea which station Jingjiu and Ran Handong had left from. 2 hours later, a black spacecraft landed on the icy land in the extreme south of the planet. "You shouldn't have brought me with you," said Ran Handong while staring into Jingjiu's eyes. "It's impossible for me not to tell my father about it." The young female officer breathed quickly, turning into a thick white fog in the cold field. "How did you guess it?" asked Jingjiu. "There are a dozen battleships in the distant space and countless satellites outside the atmosphere, not to mention the monitoring stations on the ground. But we've flown to the extreme south of the planet without being monitored," said Ran Handong with a pale face. "My father can't do it, and neither can that person." She thought that the person who wanted to see Jingjiu was that person, but she didn't expect that person to come to the icy land in the extreme south, and she didn't see any monitoring during the entire process. In order to achieve such an unimaginable feat, there was a prerequisite, and that was to control the entire military. There was only one person in the world who could do it. "I want to see him," said Jingjiu. "What do you intend to do?" asked Ran Handong in a trembling voice. A few days ago, the battleship was ablaze in the dark space. The calm and profound voice echoed in the spherical flames. Jingjiu said that if we meet. The battleship was destroyed as soon as he said this. Nobody knew what the second half of his statement was, and nobody knew what would happen when they met. Maybe nothing would happen. Chapter 845. "Nothing will happen," said Jingjiu as he headed toward the deep part of the icy land. When the soles of the regular boots touched the hard ice and snow, they produced ripples soundlessly, like the petals falling on the surface of the water. Looking at Jingjiu's back, Ran Handong suddenly said, "I'll tell my father." This was the second time she had said this. Jingjiu didn't halt his steps, nor did he heed her. He kept walking forward. After a moment of silence, Ran Handong hastened her steps to catch up with him, saying nothing more. As long as her father and the authorities of the Federation of the Milky Way didn't make a decision, she was still Jingjiu's secretary and should do what she was supposed to do. This was what Jingjiu was most satisfied with about her. They didn't walk too far in the icy land before they saw the entrance. The bracelet gave off a detestable beeping sound as the passage was opened. The two of them arrived at the underground. The underground was not a top-secret military base, but a regular long corridor. The portraits and quotes of some famous people were hung on the walls on both sides of the corridor, with a brief introduction next to each portrait. It seemed that most of the tourists here were the primary students. "This is the art gallery of the Milky Way. Today is the first day of the month, the closing day," Ran Handong said after shooting a glance at him. "I don't know why you two arranged to meet here. It might have something to do with the inheritance of the priest of the Stargate, but there are indeed many precious remains here." This art gallery was the most advanced place in the Federation of the Milky Way with the richest collections. Even the museums and art galleries in Shou City couldn't compare to this place. Today was the day the library was closed. The usual stream of visitors and groups of students were nowhere to be seen. Only the dull footsteps of two people could be heard in the empty passageway. It didn't take long before they arrived at the contemporary art gallery. The space of the buildings here was more spacious and large. Outside the glass windows that looked like small hills was the monotonous icy land, and the sky in the distance had a dark blue color. The works of art on display here were more varied than those in the previous galleries, and they were more difficult to understand and even a bit eerie for regular people. Ran Handong introduced the origin of the works of art and the common sayings of the critics, fulfilling her duty as a secretary and acting as a tour guide. Jingju didn't stop in front of the works of art to appreciate them, but he appreciated this young officer even more. It was not important whether Gu Qing could ascend or not. Since more than 1,000 years ago, the Federation of the Milky Way had ushered in an explosive period of technology and civilization. There would be new discoveries and new results every day. Every once in a while, a new mineral star would be discovered. The problem of energy exhaustion had long been solved. The difficulties of interstellar navigation had long been overcome by the rediscovery of the warped hole route and the comprehensive application of the gravitational field. It was not an exaggeration to say that although the current human society was not as glorious as the ancient civilization, it was already qualified to be called highly developed. As an accessory of the society, the arts had developed at a high speed. Coupled with the pressure from the sea of dark matter on the other side of the universe, the art forms in the contemporary society had become more extreme and profound. If one were to abandon those forms of art, one might be able to discover the hidden richness and despair, the intense clash between life and death. At the far end of the contemporary art gallery was a deep blue swimming pool that looked like a clear sky. The pipes that filled the swimming pool poured out black oil stains. Accompanied by a low sound, the oil continued to hit the bottom of the pool, swallowing the blue tiles. Finally, it slowly sank into a hole in the distance, like a black hole swallowing everything. The direction of the black oil stains was simple and clear: death or the sea of dark matter. It was said that the crude oil from a certain planet was formed naturally by the plants billions of years ago during the geological changes, and was an important energy source for the ancient civilization. It didn't feel dirty, and it kept piling up and dripping down. Instead, it seemed to have some sort of order or regularity. This art installation was installed here 31 years ago. It caused a great controversy at the time, said Ran Handong. Jingju signaled for her to stop talking. Ran Handong understood something. She turned around and walked toward the contemporary art gallery after taking a glance outside. Jingju turned around and walked to the other side. The entire Milky Way art gallery was located under the ice sheet of the South Pole, and the contemporary art gallery was at the outermost part of it. There was a cliff outside of it. The bottom of the cliff was the famous low valley of the South Pole ice sheet. As far as the eye could see, there was endless ice and snow. The cliff itself was black, looking like the oil stains in the swimming pool. In other places on the main planet, like the capital city, the Priest Manor and the meadow behind the mountains, the sky was occupied by the light of the stars, making it hard to see the blue color. The sky here was evidently different. It was blue, similar to the color of the tiles in the swimming pool. It had a sense of classical beauty, more like that of Chaotian. In places where the stars could be seen easily, people would look at the stars at night, but nobody would scream and scream in astonishment. They were used to it, so they didn't think much of it. In the eyes of Jingjiu, who was used to seeing the blue sea and the blue sky, the world in front of him consisted of nothing but the white snow and the black mountains. The black and white formed a perfect balance. Like the chess pieces on the chessboard he didn't like, they gave him a feeling that they were too stable, which he didn't like. At this moment, an extremely bright red color appeared in the dark world. The red color was not like the sword light of the thoughtless sword. It had a hint of blood. And it was not like the lava under the ground, which gave off a warm feeling. Jingjiu thought for a while, and remembered that it should be the color of the wildflowers by the cliff edge of Tianguang Peak. As he was thinking of all this, the red color came close and drifted with the wind, making a whistling sound, as if it had turned into a flag. The protective shield of the art gallery blocked the wind and snow outside. The red overcoat fell down, motionless. General Lee looked at the world outside the cliff, the expression in his eyes profound and calm. He didn't say anything. Jingju didn't say anything either. It was deathly quiet outside the cliff. The sound of the wind and snow was heard outside. The sound of the oil falling into the swimming pool was heard inside. This was the cross-section of the South Pole ice sheet. The permanent star was on the other side of the black cliff. Though it couldn't be seen, one could still see the changes in the light it emitted. The sunlight had gradually shifted, and the permanent star rose higher and higher. It was noon, and the whole planet was at its brightest. The cities near the equator, even with the protective shields, would become extremely hot. It was probably because of the hot air that the snow and ice outside the cliff grew more violent, and the color of the sky grew fainter. It was amazing that the blue sky became transparent, and one could see farther away. Standing by the cliff edge, they looked at the dark universe on the other side of the transparent sky, the space warfare and satellites that seemed to be right in front of them, the battleships and even the nearest planet. You should know what's going on in this world since you've been here for so long. General Lee's voice was calm and profound, like the expression in his eyes, like the perfect sound of a bell. Jingju said, according to the definitions in the science fiction and games, this is the main universe, and Chaotian is a time zone that drifts in the same orbit, but is independent of it. General Lee said, some people like to use the concept of a bubble as a space zone. I agree with you more. This has nothing to do with the difference in the flow of time. It's because there is no clear boundary between the two worlds. Jingju said, what I'm concerned about is, was Chaotian discovered by the god of the distant ancient civilization, or was it created by him? According to our understanding of the distant ancient civilization, that god didn't have the ability to create a world, so it should have been discovered by him in the universe. General Lee continued, since the humans of the two worlds are of the same origin, Chaotian must have been designed by him. Jingju pressed, the boundary between the two worlds can't be broken. How did he achieve all this? General Lee said, the female priest didn't reveal any information about this. Jingju knew that the female priest General Lee referred to was not the priests scattered on more than 100 planets in the Federation of the Milky Way, but the one in particular. General Lee pulled back his gaze and said calmly to Jingju, I'd like to know what conclusion you have reached recently. More than 100,000 years ago, the dimensional barrier in the universe was torn apart due to the abuse of the gravitational field weapons or weapons of a higher state and the distortion of the warped holes, and the dark matter came to the main material world. The human civilization was on the verge of destruction. That God had to choose between leaving this galaxy or fighting the sea of dark matter to the death. The distance between the galaxies was too far, and the distance was more dreadful than death. In the end, that God chose the latter option. However, he wasn't confident in his chances, so he wanted to leave a spark for the human civilization. It was then that he discovered the time zone where Chaotian was located, and he began to modify it. He brought the humans and some other lifeforms into that world, and he also put some replicas of the lifeforms infected by the sea of dark matter into that world, which are the monsters of the Snowy Kingdom. On the one hand, he believed that the humans and other lifeforms could evolve into more powerful races in that world, and he hoped that the humans could find a way to defeat the sea of dark matter. This was the longest speech Jingju had made in the last 1,000 years. His voice was devoid of any inflection, sounding like an emotionless robot making the most boring narration and talking about the most boring things. In fact, these were the most important secrets of the human civilization, and the most secretive truth. At least, they were close to the truth. General Lee said after a moment of silence, that's the gist of it. Jingju looked at the distance. There was a dark universe, planets, permanent stars, nebulae, battleships, and other objects. Jingju opened his eyes after closing them, saying, "In other words, we are all experimental subjects." Chapter 846. More than 100,000 years ago, the human civilization was on the brink of destruction because of the invasion of the Sea of Dark Matter. At the time, the humans had only two choices. Since they couldn't surrender, they could only flee or fight to the death. Many humans left this galaxy and traveled to the distant and dangerous places. They might have found a new paradise, or they might have vanished soundlessly in the vast universe. For some reason, the majority of humans couldn't leave their homeland. In the end, they perished together with the Sea of Dark Matter under the lead of that god. Now that he was a god, he must have predicted such a sorrowful outcome in advance. As such, he had to leave a seed for the human civilization, either spiritually or biologically. In addition to the remains of the distant ancient civilization that he had discovered and the humans who had reappeared in the universe like weeds, he had made some other preparations. Before the final battle, or maybe many years ago, he had found a space by the edge of the galaxy. That space was outside the real world, and its boundary was hard to cross. The laws of heaven and earth in it were special, and the flow of time was different. It was unclear how that God had brought the humans and many other life forms into that world, and he had duplicated some life forms that had been contaminated by the Sea of Dark Matter. The humans who had reappeared there had taken a path different from the real universe after a long time and a different set of rules. That world could be said to be the last refuge of the distant ancient civilization, and it could also be said to be the catalyst for the evolution of the humans. According to the judgment of that god, the humans there would one day evolve and become the true super soldiers, breaking through the boundary and returning to the real universe. For that world, it was called ascension. For this world, it was called returning. Jingzhou didn't have any proof, and he merely made the inference based on the information he had at hand. Yet, this was probably the historical truth. If this was true, many things in Chaotian would be meaningless. For many people, this would be a strong mental shock, and they would feel extremely frustrated and even hopeless. It was because everything they had believed in was unreal. The rosefinch who lived eternally in the fire, the fairy world after ascension, and all the legends and legends were merely legends and legends. The existence of the beings and the purpose of their struggle were all arranged. As Jingzhou said, they were merely experimental subjects. However, Jingzhou and generally were quite calm. The ascendants were the true fairy men. They had a powerful will and spirit that the regular people couldn't even imagine. You can call it an experiment or a gu refinement, generally said. The monsters of the Snowy Kingdom in Chaotian were the replicas of the monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter. This was the reason why Jingzhou had always felt familiar with the monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter. The intention of the god was evident. He hoped that the new humans could find a way to deal with the Sea of Dark Matter. Maybe he wants us to get used to it before coming out. Jingzhou did not want to speak up for the god, but it was indeed a possibility. God is already dead. There's no point in revisiting the past. General Lee looked at the few battleships outside the atmosphere and said indifferently, "This world calls us cocoon breakers, and I like it very much. It's because we are the new humans that have evolved. We are stronger and more advanced than the humans here. Then we have the responsibility to lead the entire human race forward." Breaking out of the cocoon to become a butterfly was used in many literary works to describe metamorphosis and evolution. It was indeed more suitable to describe the ascenders. Jingzhou felt that this was too childish. Perhaps the deceased god had thought so, which was why he said in his last words that a new god would come. Yet, he didn't think the ascenders should think so. Anyone who thought of themselves as a god was insane in his eyes. "The only responsibility I'm willing to take on is to stay alive," said Jingzhou. Though this statement sounded selfish, it had a deeper meaning. General Li reached out his hand and patted on Jingjiu's shoulder after a long moment of silence. Jingjiu didn't avoid his hand. General Li's hand stayed on Jingjiu's shoulder. He looked at Jingjiu's eyes, his smile fading away. The greater the ability, the greater the responsibility. The new humans after the evolution must take on the responsibility unwaveringly and lead the humans forward. We have to admit bravely that we are the vanguard and the bright light of the human race. However, we have to make it clear that we can fight and die, but it has nothing to do with that God. It's our free will. Jingjiu understood what he said and thought it was sensible. General Li pulled back his hand and turned to walk into the art gallery without taking another look at Jingjiu. Jingjiu followed him back into the art gallery after standing on the same spot for a while. The black oil stains were still pouring into the blue swimming pool and then slowly sinking into the hole. General Li stopped in front of a painting. Most of the painting was blue, like the swimming pool, which represented the ocean. The oil stains were floating on the surface of the ocean, and a bird was bobbing in it, covered with the oil stains all over its body. It looked extremely weak and hideous. The strokes of the painter's brush looked wild but very delicate. Judging from the messy feathers and the posture of the bird, it was evident that this bird couldn't flap its wings to fly away and was on the verge of sinking into the ocean. The blue ocean and the sky were the heaven and earth favored by the humans, and the black oil stains represented the sea of dark matter. The bird was a life contaminated by the dark matter and could turn into a monster at any moment. You should learn more about these black things, said General Li. Jingjiu was well aware of this fact. He hadn't had any contact with the sea of dark matter since he woke up in this world. If he were to do something about it, he had to learn more about it. The contaminated lives are still lives, but the most important thing is the blackness that has contaminated them. Those energies know nothing but swallowing and infecting. They have no emotions, no intelligence, and no need. Looking at the bird struggling painfully in the painting, General Li went on, if we have to use the objects of this world to describe them, the virus is the most suitable object. Jingjiu said, if they are not of the same world, there is no special medicine for them. General Li said, as such, we have no choice but to use the high-intensity light and heat energy to clean them up. To deal with the threat of the sea of dark matter, the most important thing is to isolate the black things. Like the oil stains on this patch of ocean, we need to use the foam barrier to stop them from polluting more of the surface of the ocean and contaminating more lives. This is the Star Chain Plan, said Jingjiu. General Li said, the Star Chain Plan has been carried out for more than 200 years, but we have seen some results in the last 20 years. It's because the plan consumes too many resources, and the Federation of the Milky Way can't withstand the pressure even though it has the ability to exploit the resources as a whole. Yet, the plan has to be carried out. As such, we have to control the Federation of the Milky Way completely. If he wanted to save a civilization, he would need the power of the entire civilization. First, he would need to control the civilization. That still made sense. This was the biggest difference between the Ascenders represented by General Li and the descendants of the ancient civilization represented by the priests. Both sides were arranged by the gods, and everyone had the same goal. However, as for how to do it and who should take the lead, they had been secretly fighting for many years. It had to be said that the humans were always uncreative, be it in the Federation of the Milky Way or in Chaotian, in the distant ancient civilization or in the interplanetary era. General Li said, starting from the founder, she wants to control all the Ascenders who come here, because she thinks that she is the only successor of the gods and the ruler of human society, while we are just weapons left by the gods to her. What do you think we can do? Jingjiu recalled the scene at the hot spring and fell silent. You should have guessed the origin of that priestess. She is just an artificial intelligence left behind by the ancient civilization. What right does she have to lead the entire human race? General Li said, "She must obey our orders. This is not negotiable." "I think you're all very naive," Jingjiu commented bluntly. In his eyes, the so-called contest between the Ascenders and that being was no different from the debate about the sun among the children in the green sky mirror. He Zhan and the free-traveling practitioner Jiang hurt each other not because of the sun, but because of the excessive emotions of the intelligent beings. "Are you willing to be someone's sword?" General Li looked at Jingjiu in silence, the expression in his eyes profound. "Nobody," said Jingjiu. General Li said while staring into his eyes, "You don't trust us." Jingjiu uttered, without hesitation. General Li pressed, "Is it because of the 2 assassinations? Or because of what happened in the Ce Nebula? You should know that these are just routine inspections." "I don't accept it," said Jingjiu. General Li turned around and walked to the edge of the cliff outside the art gallery. It seemed that he brought Jingjiu here to see the painting. "You didn't finish what you wanted to say on the battleship the other day, and you met me today. What's next?" The wind and snow outside the cliff suddenly grew violent. Chapter 847. The snowflakes rolled up by the wind blocked the scene outside the atmosphere, looking like Chaotian. Standing on the same spot, Jingjiu said while looking at the back of General Li, "I want an explanation." The gunshots in the square, the laser cannons heading toward the praying hall, and the battleship in the dark space all seemed to be an inspection in the eyes of General Li and others. Yet, he had said that he wouldn't accept it. "Qi Song has already been killed by you," said General Li. "You asked the Grandmaster of the Bloody Demons to find Chao Yuan and then pick me up. You wanted him to die." Jingjiu had said something similar before the battleship was destroyed and the immortal Qi Song was killed. The immortal Qi Song had a very high status in the cultivation world of Chaotian, and his cultivation state was also very high. It was not easy to kill him. Even General Li couldn't do it. If Jingjiu's prediction was correct, he and Chao Yuan were doing General Li a favor by killing this person. It was not a big deal. "My opinion is different from that of the great Grandmaster. I don't like these devil men of the deviant sections. But I just wanted to teach him a lesson this time. I didn't expect you to kill him directly." General Li continued, "There are not many ascendants in Chaotian. We should cherish them. If you want to cherish them, why do you need to inspect them?" "Why did you attack Jian Shilai?" asked Jingjiu. Like the last fugitives of the distant ancient civilization, those ascendants might not join our cause. They might leave. Looking at the wind and snow outside the cliff, General Li went on, "If they left, they would be meaningless to this world. It would be a waste." Jingjiu said, "I believe that Chao Yuan and Jian Shilai won't show any intention of leaving." General Li said, "But I have to make sure that they are obedient. Otherwise, if they join the Federation of the Milky Way, they might affect the overall situation." "Why didn't Byren and that disgraced ferryman accept the inspection?" asked Jingjiu. General Li said, "They don't even have the courage to leave, so they are not qualified to accept the inspection." Jingjiu said, "It looks like you need some obedient fighters." "Sorry, I'm not that kind of person." General Li said, "You're wrong. It's Aoyama that needs some obedient fighters." Jingjiu pressed, "If that's the case, why do you still bother me?" General Li said, "Like I said, it's just a routine. The essence of human beings was not a repeater, but it was an endless cycle. The rising and setting of the sun, the rotating sea of stars, and the rules of history. Everything, be it on a daily or spiritual level, would always repeat itself until the end. Ascenders were able to break out of the cocoon because they could at least break through a certain fixed barrier for a certain period of time and break out of this boring cycle." General Li didn't continue this topic. "You didn't kill Yunmai. I have to thank you for that," he said before Jingjiu could speak. He and the cocoon breakers in the Federation of the Milky Way didn't expect that Jingjiu would go to Capital City directly after leaving the Stargate base and coming to the main planet, and then barge into the building of the military headquarters, causing such a commotion. I dons the Qingjiu. Like, Jingjiu. Jingjiu. General Li wasn't surprised that Jingjiu could figure out Shen Yunmai's background, saying, "There is something wrong with his mind. You should give way to him." "I don't understand the thoughts of you young people," said General Li after a sigh. "I don't understand the thoughts of you young people," said General Li after a sigh. Jingjiu asked, "How is the Qingjiu now? How long will it take?" "Why?" According to the hidden rules of the cultivation circle in Chaotian, the cultivation practitioners wouldn't take on disciples or have descendants unless they were certain that they couldn't ascend or their lives were running out. The former had been changed a great deal by Tai Pingzhenren, but the latter had lasted until now. The Qingjiu ascended 40,000 years ago, which was the standard time in the Federation of the Milky Way, was merely a few hundred years after the Grandmaster of Aoyama came to this world. Why did he have Shen Yunmai? Looking at the wind and snow in the sky, General Li said worriedly, "The Qingjiu is not in a good condition. He won't have much time left. He'll see you before he leaves." After a moment of silence, Jingjiu asked, "Where is Chao Yuan?" "He should be recuperating at the forward base," said General Li. "She lie." Jingjiu pressed. General Li said, "I did it myself. He was slightly wounded and is undergoing special training. He should come out soon." "It's good that he's still alive," Jingjiu said expressionlessly. "Where is the immortal Tan?" asked General Li. Jingjiu countered with a question, "Haven't you found him yet?" "No," replied General Li. "Maybe he hasn't come out yet," said Jingjiu. Since the book titled, The Path Toward Heaven, was his own story, its accuracy could only be maintained until he ascended and left. He had no idea what had happened in Chaotian after his ascension, whether the immortal Tan had ascended or not, and what Chao Yuan and Jian Shilai were thinking and experiencing. "Do you have any other questions?" asked General Li. "No," replied Jingjiu. General Li said, "I'll send someone to pick you up later." Jingjiu uttered and flicked his finger lightly. A sword fire left the tip of his finger and drifted into the blue swimming pool. The black and sticky oil started to burn fiercely when it came in contact with the sword fire, exuding a terrible burning smell. The automatic fire prevention device in the art gallery had detected the change of temperature and sprayed out the foam automatically, but it couldn't extinguish the flames. The foam fell toward Jingjiu and General Li, but they separated when they couldn't reach them, piling up on the floor like an ocean of clouds. It didn't take long for the black oil in the swimming pool to be burned away, and the pipe was blocked because of the high temperature. General Li turned to fly toward the outside of the cliff after shooting a deep glance at Jingjiu, disappearing into the wind and snow instantly. The line left by the red cloak looked like a bloody line in the sky. As the bloody line faded away, the front part of the line had already broken through the atmosphere, passing the space stations and battleships and heading toward the deep part of the universe. A black battleship was adjusting its posture slowly in the quiet space. A flat alloy device was retracted into the interior of the battleship soundlessly. The alloy device was neither a gravitational field generator nor a laser gun, and it was different from the powerful weapons commonly used by the military of the Federation of the Milky Way. It was unclear what it was. In the command room at the head of the battleship, a steady and slender finger left the red button. The owner of the finger was a middle-aged officer wearing a pair of silver-rimmed glasses. The light from the permanent star outside the window passed through the glasses and fell on his eyes, reflecting a profound intent. Time seemed to have slowed down a lot. The largest space station was the space laboratory of the Science Academy of the Federation, which looked like a huge metal building that had been pieced together randomly, emitting a dazzling white glow under the light from the permanent star. The old dean was walking slowly along the passage by the edge of the space station. His white hair seemed to be ablaze when it was illuminated by the light from the window. He pushed open the door and entered an ordinary room. After getting used to the change of the direction of gravity, he took out a chip and handed it over to the dean. An elegant middle-aged professor in his 30s took over the chip and said politely, "Thank you for your hard work." The Science Academy enjoyed a high status in the Federation of the Milky Way, and the dean was a very powerful man. It was unclear what information was contained in the chip and why the dean had to deliver it to the dean in person. It was unclear what the status of the middle-aged professor was, but the dean showed great respect to him, saying, "If you need anything else, just tell me at any time." Having said that, the dean turned around and left the room. He rubbed his eyes, which were stung by the light, and waved his hand to reduce the rate of light entering the space station. Then he turned around and took a look at the tightly closed door, revealing a self-mocking smile. In the room, the middle-aged professor started to read the information in the chip through the terminal. It was the detailed name list and personnel information of all the universities and academic institutions in the Federation of the Milky Way that were involved in the superparticle transformation of nuclear fusion furnaces. It didn't take long for his sight to fall on planet Tianpu and notice the professor surnamed Go from Northwest University of China. He had become a university professor from a lecturer in a training class in a few dozen days, which was rather eye-catching. It was a pity that Professor Go had left Northwest University of China a few days ago. It was said that he had returned to the main planet to visit his relatives, but who knew where he had gone? Looking at the photo in the file, the middle-aged professor curled up the corners of his mouth, revealing a mild smile, saying, "He is indeed the son-in-law of the Bai family." He got up and walked to the bookshelf. He took out the book titled The Path Toward Heaven and started to read the content related to Yamatsai. A moment later, he murmured to himself, "I'll go and take a look one more time." No sooner had he said this than he extended his right forefinger and wrote a talisman in the air. The talisman entered the signal collector and was enlarged to the large data processing equipment at the end of the laboratory. It was connected to the civil network of the interplanetary network and entered the game. Those battleships and space stations were like the decorations of the main planet, hovering in the space in silence. There was a small planet in the distance. The surface of the planet was densely covered with craters formed by collisions many millions of years ago. The depth of one of the inconspicuous craters was extremely dark and gloomy. It was difficult for the rays of the permanent star to reach there, and the temperature was very low. An old man with a gloomy expression was sitting in the shadow with his eyes closed. It was unclear how long he had been sitting there. All of a sudden, he opened his eyes and lifted his head to look at the patch of red in the sky, asking, "Do you really believe in him?" The atmosphere of this planet was very thin, making it difficult for sound to travel. The old man's lips were a bit dry, but his voice traveled to the highest point of the crater in an inexplicable way. Standing on the peak of the crater, General Lee turned his head to look at the main planet that looked like a snowball in the distance, saying, "He is a disciple of Aoyama, and this is a significant event for the entire human race. Why don't you believe in him?" The black spaceship left the icy land of the South Pole and headed toward the Priest Manor in the northern hemisphere after passing through the scorching sunlight. The spaceship didn't leave the atmosphere, so it couldn't travel at a high speed. The scenery outside the window could be seen clearly. Jingjia wasn't in the mood to enjoy the scenery. He sat in the chair with his eyes closed, lost in thought. As the pure white icy land was replaced by the blue ocean, Jingjio suddenly opened his eyes and asked, "How many have come?" "The targets you asked me to monitor have moved 17 times recently." Staring at the data on the light screen of the terminal, Ran Handong said, "2 of them have come to the main planet. They should be outside the atmosphere. Today is February 13th, the day of Ning Kei's victory. Hope he can conquer heaven as soon as possible." In addition, Master Ruegan has published a new book, Counting the Distinguished Figures, about the historical officialdom, the late Ming Dynasty, and the Dream of the Red Chamber. Those who like this kind of book should check it out. Thank you. Chapter 848. The game, The Path Toward Heaven, was Jingjiu's declaration to the entire Federation of the Milky Way. He truly wanted to see the Snow Girl. In fact, this game was also a fish pond he dug and a wudong tree he planted. He wanted to see which fish was willing to swim over and eat the familiar aquatic plants, and which bird was willing to fly over and stand on a tree branch to look at the familiar scenery. There were thousands of suspicious accounts in the data provided by the Twirling Rain Company, and the suspicious ones were the symbols. Jingjiu and Ran Handong analyzed the conditions offered to Ran Donglu by Jingjiu and narrowed the range to 100 accounts. In the end, Jingjiu had determined more than 30 suspicious accounts and asked Ran Handong to monitor them in secret. Some of them must be the ascendants from Chaotian. When he met General Li that day, the digital symbols of two people appeared on the main planet. It was evidently suspicious. Jingjiu looked at the outside of the window. The ring on his finger began to emit a faint glow, tracking the two digital symbols. His line of sight moved along with the symbols and eventually fixed on a battleship outside the atmosphere. The middle-aged officer on the battleship adjusted the silver-rimmed glasses on the bridge of his nose as he watched the light screen attentively. On the light screen was a black battleship moving forward slowly, seemingly motionless against the background of the ocean. Jingjiu was on the black battleship. He didn't know that Jingjiu was looking at him at the moment. Time passed slowly. A tiny whirlpool formed in the water in the glass cup. The middle-aged officer suddenly felt something was out of place. The ascendants were the true ferrymen, so they had a keen sense of the changes in the energy of heaven and earth and a strong sense of danger, which was almost metaphysical. If he felt something was out of place, it meant that something was out of place, meaning that something was out of place. The water in the glass cup suddenly stopped flowing, as did his Tao heart that had calmed down again and his slender fingers. It was unclear when his finger had pressed on the red button again. It was so steady that it seemed that it would never be pressed down, or that it would be pressed down at any moment. The huge battleship adjusted its position along with the low hum of the electromagnetic interference. The mysterious and peculiar weapon underneath the battleship extended out soundlessly and aimed at the planet. Jingjiu left the battleship and looked at the brightest star in the sky. It was not the permanent star, but the space station of the Science Academy of the Federation. The middle-aged professor was still in the game, The Path Toward Heaven, enjoying the lotus flowers on the surface of the lake in the 1,000-mile windy corridor. Having not seen the lotus for a long time, he still felt that the lotus was beautiful. The old scenery made him relax a little. If he was suddenly attacked at this time, he might not be able to react. But nothing happened. The book on the table moved without any wind and turned a few pages. So it's a saint. Jingjiu pulled back his gaze and noticed that Ran Handong had been staring at his face. Ran Handong's face was very pale, even paler than when she guessed that he met General Li that day. Her eyes were filled with nervousness and her lips were tightly pursed because she had guessed what he wanted to do at that moment. Today, General Li was prepared for the failure of the negotiation. If the negotiations between the two sides broke down, then war would ensue. This could also be seen as a threat. Jingjiu would not accept it, so he made preparations in advance to counterattack at any time. He would use his divine sense to attack that professor through the Tao Toward Heaven game. Then, he would turn into a sword light and enter the gravitational field the moment the battleship activated its weapons, charging into the command room at the bow of the battleship. None of this happened. It was because he wasn't sure what the secret weapon of the battleship was. It was evident that it was not the base of the laser cannon or the nuclear bomb. Normally, it couldn't be the legendary neutron cannon, unless General Li didn't intend to destroy the main planet. Moreover, he didn't know where General Li was and whether General Li had any backup plan. No ascendant was more powerful than him. Though he was as confident as he was in Chaotian, it didn't mean that he was willing to face such a dangerous situation. Most importantly, the negotiations between the two sides hadn't broken down yet. Why would he fight against his great grandmaster? Have you decided to accept their conditions? Ran Handong asked in a trembling voice. Jingju uttered After a moment of silence, Ran Handong leaned against the back of the chair slowly, looking relaxed. It could be understood that she had given up all hope. Why did you bring me here then? She asked angrily. You're the secretary, said Jingjiu. What he meant was that he was very lazy, so she was responsible for informing the government and the praying hall of his decision. And she was also responsible for explaining and dealing with others. Ran Handong didn't bother to say anything more. She curled her body into the chair and pretended to be asleep with her eyes closed. The spaceship sped up and soon flew out of the atmosphere. It was exceedingly quiet, drifting forward like the ashes of a piece of paper. In fact, it traveled at a high speed. A dozen minutes later, it landed on the lawn of the manor house. Different from when it left, it didn't conceal itself, attracting many gazes. The main preacher Tai Yang and the people in the praying hall watched in surprise as Jingju walked down from the spaceship, wondering where he had been. After Jingju returned to the small building, Zhong Lizi, who had finished her classes at the College of Priests, came over happily. She was surprised to find that Ran Handong was not there. I've left, said Jingju. There was no preamble or warning, it was just this sentence. Zhong Lizi was startled. She had expected this day, but she didn't expect it to come so suddenly. From the underground apartment to the University of Stargate and then to this manor house full of green trees, she had a feeling that everything was not real. He would leave her one day, and the dream would come to an end one day. After a long moment of silence, Zhong Lizi asked, "Can you tell me your story?" That night, this youth knocked on her door and told her that he had seen the recruitment notice she had written on the internet and asked if he could move in with her. Zhong Lizi was aware that he was lying, but she didn't expose him. It was not because he had a handsome face, but because she was aware that everyone had their own difficulties and circumstances. She had neither asked him about his difficulties nor inquired about his background, but she wanted to hear it from his mouth that day. "The path toward heaven is my story," said Jingjiu. Zhong Lizi remained silent for a long time with her head lowered. She had vaguely guessed the truth a long time ago, but she didn't want to think about it that way. It was because the truth was too shocking. He was not a person of this world. What could be more remote and despairing than this fact? "So, you are the Ascendant, the immortal Jingyang." Zhong Lizi lifted her small face bravely and stared into Jingju's eyes. "Did you come to our world to find those companions?" she asked in a trembling voice. Jingju uttered, "Have you found them now?" asked Zhong Lizi nervously. Jingju uttered, again. Zhong Lizi pressed, "Are you going to meet those people today?" Jingju uttered, again. General Li was the immortal Chunyang. The organization of the Cocoon Breakers or the Butterfly Association, the self-governing union of the Ascendants, was under his control. All of this was the will of the Grandmaster. The Aoyama sect ruled the Federation of the Milky Way. He was a disciple of Aoyama. He was the most outstanding disciple. He had already proven that Shin Yunmai was not as good as Jingjiu. In other words, this vast universe and this civilization would belong to him in the future. What else could he say then? Well, it should be the case. "Is it safe to go there?" asked Zhong Lizi earnestly while looking at Jingjiu. Jingjiu suddenly felt touched. He curled up the corners of his mouth and uttered while rubbing her head with a faint smile. "I wish all the lovers in the world will be together forever. Even if they are separated for a while, Their hearts should be together regardless of the method. I hope everyone will be happy. Chapter 849. Zhonglizi was a smart girl. She knew that the story about the path toward heaven was true, so she had figured out many things, such as why her teacher thought Jingjiu was the new god, why so many important figures had come to the mansion of the priest clan lately, why the capital city had been cordoned off that day, and why so many things had happened. The praying hall and those ascendants were competing for Jingjiu. Jingjiu had already made his choice. He and those ascendants came from the same place. In other words, they were from the same hometown. Jingjiu had told her about being a guest in a strange place and the anchor point. She understood his decision, but she was still worried. "Don't trust those people," she said. "I won't trust anybody," said Jingjiu. Zhonglizi didn't feel disappointed by what he said. She asked nervously, "Can I go with you?" "No, you can't. Put away the paper crane I gave you. Tear it up or burn it when you are in danger." Having said that, Jingjiu came to the deck. Zhonglizi knew that she couldn't change his decision, so she pouted her mouth indignantly. In the next moment, she came to his side with a cup of tea in her hand and handed it to him. Jingjiu took the teacup and took a sip, looking at the tree in the courtyard. Following his line of sight, Zhonglizi saw Jiang Yuxiao and Hua Shi sitting under the tree. Jiang Yuxiao was in a bad mood, saying something in a low voice. Hua Shi's eyes were wide open, showing an innocent expression. It seemed that she didn't understand what Jiang Yuxia had said. The lawn outside the courtyard was like a carpet, and the green trees formed a forest. All of a sudden, a gust of wind arose from the deep part of the garden, ruffling the treetops. It was thought that a floating train had arrived from the underground. In the next moment, a few floating cars and even 2 spaceships arrived at the manor. Ran Handong walked down from one of the spaceships and stood on the lawn, welcoming the important figures who had come from all over the place. The main preachers of the praying hall, the high-ranking officials of the government, the counselors of the management committee, the heads of various clans, and even Ran Donglu had come in person. "Take Major Ran with you. She can help you, and you need someone to take care of your life," said Zhonglizi. Jingjiu didn't heed those important figures who had come to the manor. "I'll take Hua Shi with me," he said while looking at the 2 girls under the tree. Zhonglizi was startled, wondering why it was Hua Shi. If Ran Handong's identity was inconvenient, Jiang Yuxiao was also a good choice. Hua Shi was a cute and ignorant child. Even if she was a distant relative of the Hua family, how could she help you? What's going on? Who did he meet today? General Li? This is impossible. That person met him a few days ago. Don't tell me he doesn't even have this much patience? This is betrayal. It was because Ran Handong told them what had happened that day that those important figures came to the mansion of the female priest. They wanted to know the truth of the matter, and they also wanted to change the direction of this story. Jingjiu didn't see them, not even Ran Donglu. However, no one dared to barge upstairs. Even the voices of questioning and reprimanding were very soft. That day in the building of the military headquarters, even Shen Yunmai was almost incapacitated. Therefore, nobody dared to do anything to Jingjiu, not even to sound him out. Faced with an emotionless alloy wall, their fists had no choice but to pull back since they didn't dare touch it. The discussions in the grand hall grew quieter and quieter until it became absolutely quiet. The atmosphere was rather depressing. Dozens of gazes fell on Ran Donglu, hoping that this old man would say something. Ran Donglu didn't say anything, sitting in the chair expressionlessly. In fact, we can't blame him. The female priest didn't say anything to him after meeting him that day, and she didn't express her attitude. What could he do? Hua Shi said this to Jiang Yuxia in a low voice after taking a look at the scene downstairs. Jiang Yuxia let out a bitter smile, saying nothing. It was then that the door of the room was pushed open. Zhonglizi motioned for them to come in. What was happening in the room was not the farewell ceremony, but the preparation for the departure, like packing the luggage. Jingjiu didn't have much luggage, so it was easy for him to pack. He liked the tea boiled in the iron kettle, but it was impossible for him to bring the kettle with him. All he needed were a few pieces of clothing. It didn't take long for Ran Handong to fold the blue hoodies neatly and put them into the black backpack. At this time, she was still playing the role of a secretary perfectly. She asked after some hesitation, "Do you need me to go with you?" Jingjiu shot a glance at Hua Shi, who had just walked into the room, and said, "I'll take her with me." Ran Handong felt surprised. Jiang Yuxiao was quite surprised, wondering why he wanted to take her with him. Hua Shi was even more surprised. "Me?" she asked innocently while pointing at her own nose. Jingjiu didn't explain the reason. Hua Shi looked at Zhong Lizi with a pitiful expression. She was Zhong Lizi's personal attendant. Zhong Lizi said apologetically, "He said he would ensure your safety." Hua Shi said nervously, "Can I not? I have to ask my family for their opinion." "I'll ask them," said Jingjiu. What he said had a hidden meaning, but Zhong Lizi, Jiang Yuxia and Ran Handong didn't figure it out. Hua Shi glanced at him angrily. It was unclear if it was because she was angry, but she wasn't as scared as before. She took the black backpack with a grunt and put it on her back. She turned around and walked out of the room after tying the two shoulder straps together. When Jingjiu arrived on the Scorching Sun battleship he attracted the attention of the whole world. The whole of the Federation of the Milky Way and the humans on hundreds of planets were amazed by his handsome appearance and guessed his origin. Yet, he kept a low profile when he left the main planet that day. It was not broadcasted live on TV, and no populace knew about it. Jingjiu and Zhong Lizi walked to the other end of the lawn, and Hua Shi followed behind them with the backpack on her back. Only a few dozen people witnessed the scene, and they were all important figures in the Federation of the Milky Way. When they parted in the icy land of the South Pole, General Li said that he would send someone to pick him up. As the leader of the humans, he didn't lie, and he was very punctual. A dozen floating cars with the military insignia were parked on the other side of the lawn noiselessly. Dozens of soldiers of the special forces in full armor and mechanical armor were waiting for him. There were many trees in the middle of the lawn, some of which formed a forest and some of which stood alone. Jingjiu and Zhong Lizi stopped short. They happened to be under a tree. It seemed that the young girl Hua Shi had a bad temper. She didn't heed them and walked into the floating car. She took off the backpack and tossed it carelessly at the end of the seat. The shade of the tree shone on Jingjiu and Zhong Lizi, and the breeze blew over, making them feel very cool. It was a pity that it was not raining at the moment, otherwise it would be more similar to the University of Stargate. All the gazes, including the important figures of the government and the soldiers who came to pick up Jingjiu, were fixed on this young man and woman. The first female priest of a commoner and the handsome youth, who had a mysterious background but was also highly regarded by that person and generally at the same time, were a perfect match for each other. If there were a story in this world, the male and female protagonists of the story should be like this. In fact, I like the novel you wrote very much. Zhong Lizi lifted her head and stared into Jingjiu's eyes, saying earnestly, "I like Lian Sanyue, Zhao Liu, and the immortal Jingyang." "I know." Jingjiu reached out his hand and rubbed her head. A dozen floating cars left the lawn and headed toward the outside of the manor house noiselessly, soon disappearing without a trace. It seemed that they were heading toward Capital City. The important figures had a complicated emotion, but they somehow felt more relaxed. The situation was still the same as before, but there was at least one benefit: peace. Many of them even thought that Jingjiu had accepted General Li's invitation because of this word. The main preacher Tai Yang, the preachers from the Stargate base, and the counselor Sha Yu maintained their bowing posture. Their way of thinking was different from those people. They still believed in Jingjiu, thinking that this was a test from God. The path of life was long, like the passage between the stars and the ocean. Who could predict what would happen in the future? A dozen floating cars entered Capital City at a low altitude. The streets had been cleared out a long time ago, and the soldiers responsible for guarding the streets could be seen everywhere. The closer they got to the center of Capital City, the tighter the security became, and the more solemn the atmosphere became. The battleships outside the atmosphere could be seen clearly, and the platforms of the laser cannons could even be seen. Hundreds of combat mechas were hovering in the sky in silence, their weapons aimed at the building of the military headquarters. The internal structure of the building of the military headquarters had been repaired, but the traces of that day's battle could still be seen on the outer wall. The atmosphere in Capital City didn't become a bit more relaxed until the dozen floating cars entered the underground parking lot of the building, one after another. The elevator arrived at the top floor of the building from the underground parking lot. Ding! The door of the elevator was opened. The middle-aged female officer by the surname of Chen was waiting outside. "General Li is waiting for you," she said softly. She was even more polite than that day. Jingjiu motioned for Hua Shi to wait for him outside, and walked toward the office at the end of the metal corridor. Hua Shi felt restless, looking around curiously. It was unclear whether it was because the metal surface of the chair was too smooth and cold, or because she was nervous. There were books everywhere in the office, like the library of scripts on Shuriwe Peak. General Li was reading a book, while standing in front of a bookshelf. Hearing Jingjiu's footsteps, he asked without raising his head, "The kid of the Hua family?" Jingjiu uttered, General Li said, "It's an interesting choice." Chapter 850. Many people didn't understand why Jingjiu chose to cooperate with the military and why he took Hua Shi with him instead of Ran Handong. He didn't reply to General Li, because to reply would be to explain, and to explain would be to lie, and he was too lazy to lie. Well, the main reason was that he was actually very good at lying, but in front of people like General Li, there would always be problems if he spoke too much. General Li thought of another aspect. The Hua family is different from the other aristocratic families. They are very low-key and do not participate in many affairs. Only a few people know that they are very close to the priest. Jingjiu uttered, insincerely. General Li put the book back on the shelf and asked, "I heard that you are very interested in that painting of sunflowers?" The happenings on the Stargate base couldn't be concealed from him, even though it was a private conversation between Jingjiu and the priest of the Stargate. Jingjiu uttered again. "That painting is not in the art gallery, nor is it in the north. It is now in the Hua family." General Li said, "Did you bring the Hua family's child to see that painting?" Obviously, he didn't believe that Jingjiu's reason for bringing Hua Shi along was so simple and ridiculous. He believed that Jingjiu still did not fully trust him and wanted to maintain the connection with the priestess. Jingjiu didn't continue the topic, but brought up a completely different topic. The dark matter is not any known or unknown particle. The book that Li Jiang had just read was 7 Ways to Disperse Low-Velocity Neutrinos. He sighed and said, "There is a pessimistic theory in the scientific community that the existence of dark matter or dark energy is beyond the scope of human imagination." Jingjiu said, "So humans need to evolve." General Li looked at him and said, "We are all evolved humans." "Not enough," said Jingjiu. General Li said, "I hope you can still be as optimistic as you are now after you go to that planet." Jingjiu asked, "Must we go?" General Li said, "If you need this civilization to do something for you, then you should also do something for this civilization." Jingjiu was silent for a while, then said, "I'll go to the Hua family first." General Li said, "The fleet will wait for you." General Li sent a car to the priest's manor to take Jingjiu to the military headquarters building, which was a kind of announcement. He intended to let the entire Federation of the Milky Way know that this issue had been settled. In the future, the Federation of the Milky Way would operate according to the previous rules. The priests would do what the priests had to do, and the government would do what the government had to do. Now that the announcement had been made, there was no need to do anything else. Jingjiu left the office with Hua Shi and took the elevator to the lobby of the military building. Then, they walked out of the building. Throughout the entire process, countless gazes fell on him. Their gazes were filled with vigilance, hostility, and respect. A few days ago, Shun Yunmai was almost crippled by him here. Walking out of the military headquarters building, the combat armors in the sky had already scattered in all directions like a flock of birds. The few battleships at the edge of the atmosphere that brought about a great sense of pressure had also gone far away, and there were pedestrians on the streets again. Hua Shi carried her black backpack and quickened her pace to catch up with Jingjiu. She asked, "Where are we going?" Jingjiu answered, "The Hua family." Hua Shi said with her eyes wide open, "I've never been there. How can I take you there?" The relationship between distant relatives was quite remote in the interplanetary age, and they could even be separated by a few hundred light years. She grew up on the Stargate base, so it was normal that she hadn't had any dealings with the Hua family on the main planet. "Aren't you curious about it?" asked Jingjiu. Hua Shi said innocently, "Aren't they all people with 2 eyes and 1 nose?" There was a lake surrounded by mountains, which was similar to the lake in the north. There was no old city on the other side of the lake, nor was there a young girl in a bathrobe. There was only a castle. The castle was built with stones. It was not a remnant of the distant ancient civilization, but a replica. It gave off a gloomy feeling. It was unclear whether it was because few people visited it, or the green vines that covered the walls. As Jingjiu and Hua Shi arrived in front of the castle, the gate opened automatically. An old steward in a black formal suit bowed to them and said, "Welcome." This old butler, who was dressed in a black suit, had a head full of white hair. His every movement had a refined temperament, and his movements were very precise. Hua Shi looked at him curiously while holding the shoulder strap of the backpack. The old steward said with a small smile, "I'm indeed a biochemical person." Hua Shi stuck out her tongue and said apologetically, "I'm sorry." The old steward raised his right hand and said with a smile, "Due to some reasons, it's inconvenient for the master to come here. Please help yourselves." The Hua family was one of the most resourceful clans, so they knew the identity of Jingjiu. Jingjiu chose the military, not waiting for the message from the praying hall. Since the Hua family was close to that person, it was inconvenient for them to see him. However, it was evident that the Hua family didn't want to offend the military and Jingjiu, so they didn't refuse his visit. This castle was a replica, but the artworks inside were real. And they were not modern paintings, but mostly oil paintings from the distant ancient civilization. It didn't take long for Jingjiu to find the painting. The dozen sunflowers in the painting were so full that there was no gap between them, giving off a feeling that even if there was a lamp on the opposite side, the light wouldn't be able to pass through. More importantly, these sunflowers were evidently dehydrated, their branches and leaves a bit soft. Jingjiu had seen a replica of this painting in the art gallery in Shou City. That replica had a very high status in the history of art in the Federation of the Milky Way, and this painting was an authentic one. When Jingjiu saw the replica, he thought that these sunflowers should be bound by something, otherwise they would fall down in all directions. After seeing the authentic painting of sunflowers today, he had finally found the answer. The sunflowers were bound by a piece of cloth, the edges of which were embroidered with a bit of blood. The sunflowers in full bloom, the weak branches, and the bloody laced cloth. This painting had the feeling of a young girl, but it was also bloody. It had a peculiar sense of beauty when all these scenes were put together. The space elevator seemed to be moving slowly, but it was actually ascending rapidly. The ground was gradually left behind, and the horizon in the distance had a clear arc. The atmosphere had been broken through, leaving behind a foggy horizon. Jingjiu and Huashi walked out of the elevator and entered the space station. After passing through a straight passageway, they entered the interior of the battleship. Ding! The identities of the two were confirmed. Hundreds of officers stood up from their seats and gazed at them attentively, then they saluted in tandem. Jingjiu noticed that some of the officers looked familiar, and then he found that this battleship was the Scorching Sun battleship. The captain of the Scorching Sun battleship came before Jingjiu and said with a complicated expression, "The investigation has been over for some time. We reassembled the day before yesterday, and nobody was left behind." The captain's face was a bit pale, and he was much thinner than before. It was evident that he had suffered a lot during the investigation. "What's your name?" asked Jingjiu. The captain stood at attention and saluted Jingjiu, saying tersely, "Captain of the Scorching Sun battleship of the second level, Jiang Zhixing, waiting for your instruction, advisor." The Scorching Sun battleship belonged to the Star Patrol fleet. Jiang Zhixing graduated from the military academy and didn't have any faction background. The news of what had happened in the building of the military headquarters had spread. He and the officers and soldiers of the Scorching Sun battleship were aware that they would have stayed in the military prison for the rest of their lives without Jingjiu's help. They might even have died quietly. They were very grateful and in awe of Jingjiu. Those who could defeat Shin Yunmai were qualified to be respected by the whole universe. Jingjiu asked, "Consultant?" Only then did Jiang Zhixing realize that he had not been aware of this matter. He said, "You are now the chief advisor of the military ministry and have the highest authority. Both the Scorching Sun battleship and the authority of the military headquarters represented General Li's sincerity. This was also responsibility or karma. Just like the word aoyama." After a moment of silence, Jingjiu asked, "Where is Shin Yunmai?" Jiang Zhixing said, "He has been demoted. He is now the commander of the Star Corps fleet." He noticed the little girl behind Jingjiu and quickly waved his hand. Huashi was carrying a black backpack. She seemed to be exhausted. A secretary stepped forward, wanting to take it for her, but she refused. The Scorching Sun battleship left the space station and joined a few other battleships in the distance, forming a simple formation and heading toward the deep part of the dark and gloomy universe. The destination of the fleet was the Jelly Star region. Its sole task was to escort the chief advisor of the military ministry, Jingjiu, to observe the Sea of Dark Matter. Standing by the window and looking at the stars in the dark universe, Jingjiu remained silent. Back when he was on the journey from the Stargate base to the main planet, he often stood by the window and looked at this patch of universe. The battleship was still the Scorching Sun battleship, and it was still the same room and the same large floor-to-ceiling window. The universe outside the window didn't seem to be any different. It was the same black screen with countless stars on it. Yet, some things had changed. He had never seen these stars before, and he wondered what the Sea of Dark Matter looked like. In addition to that, there were other changes. Huashi came to his side and asked while looking at the starry sky outside the window, "Now that you want to rely on General Li, why did you oppose him? Did you want to prove your ability? Why did General Li dare employ you? Sometimes I really don't understand you people. What are the masters thinking? You were the enemy a moment ago, and now you have suddenly become a comrade. What's the difference between this and playing house?" Jingjiu didn't pay any attention to her. Huashi continued after shooting a glance at him, "Even if you have other ideas, you don't have to go there." "I want to see it," said Jingjiu. Lien Sandue had told him that he wanted to see the sun after coming to the human world. He told Zhao Lei that the purpose of cultivation was to attain immortality, but the purpose of immortality was not to enjoy life. It was to see more sceneries. After coming to this world, he often looked at the stars, the battleships and surfed the internet, it was because these were new sceneries for him. The sea of dark matter was also a sceneries. Those planets that were different from each other were also sceneries. For instance, the planet in front of him was very small, with craters everywhere on its surface. Jingjiu asked while looking at a crater, "Can you kill people?" Hua Shi opened her eyes wide, unable to understand what he was talking about. "I mean, can you kill people yourself?" Jingjiu pressed. "It's against the law," said Hua Shi with a baffled expression. "It's also against the law to clone people," said Jingjiu. Hua Shi opened her eyes wide, looking extremely innocent. "You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.